The year is 1342. It is the deep, slumberous heart of winter in the northern valleys, a time when the world seems to have paused, holding its breath beneath a heavy, unbroken blanket of white. Here, in the high stone keep that overlooks the frozen river, the night has settled in with a profound and heavy silence. It is a silence so absolute, so thick and enveloping, that it feels less like the absence of sound and more like a physical weight, a soft velvet curtain drawn across the windows of the world. Outside the thick granite walls of the fortress, the snow is falling. It falls not with a fury, but with a relentless, hypnotic gentleness, flake upon flake, descending from a sky the color of charcoal and bruised iron. If one were to stand upon the battlements, wrapped in furs against the biting chill, one would see nothing but the endless gray and white. The ancient pine forest, which borders the eastern edge of the estate, is lost to the eye, its tall, jagged sentinels turned into soft, ghostly mounds by the accumulation of the drifts. The wind is absent tonight. There is no howling gale to rattle the shutters or whistle through the arrow slits. There is only the stillness of the cold, a crisp, biting air that freezes the breath in the throat and turns the exhale into a momentary cloud of crystal fog. It is a night for sleeping. It is a night for the fire. It is a night for the slow, methodical work of hands that need not hurry. Inside the keep, the air is different. It is thick with the scent of wood smoke and dried herbs, a warm, stagnant ocean of comfort that contrasts sharply with the biting frost on the other side of the stone. We find ourselves in the solar, the private chamber facing the south, designed to catch the meager warmth of the winter sun during the day and to hold the heat of the hearth during the long, stretching hours of the night. The room is circular, following the curve of the tower, and the walls are lined with tapestries of faded wool. These hangings, woven by fingers long since still, depict scenes of pastoral calm, stag hunts where the hunters seem to be napping, and feasts where the food sits untouched on long tables. The fabric of the tapestries is heavy, serving as insulation against the chill that radiates from the stone, and in the dim light, the figures seem to sway gently, not from a breeze, but from the rising currents of heat drifting up from the fireplace. The fireplace is the heart of this room, and indeed the heart of the night. It is a wide, cavernous mouth of blackened stone, built to house logs the size of a man's torso. Tonight it is fed with aged oak and split logs of applewood, wood that has seasoned in the dry sheds for 3 summers. The fire does not roar, it murmurs. It burns with a steady, orange consistency, a low, pulsating glow that bathes the room in a light the color of amber and honey. Every few minutes, a log shifts with a soft, settling crunch, sending a small, lazy parade of sparks drifting up into the dark throat of the chimney. The sound is rhythmic, a natural metronome counting down the seconds of the evening in a language of heat and ash. In the center of the room sits a heavy table of dark, polished walnut. The surface of the wood is smooth, worn down by generations of elbows and heavy books, gleaming dully in the firelight. On this table, the preparations have been made. Tonight is the beginning of a task that will span the length of the winter. Tonight, the work begins on the wedding dress. There is no bride here, pacing nervously. There is no groom waiting in the chapel. There is only the dressmaker, a figure of calm and solitude, and the materials of her trade. She is not present in the narrative of the moment, save for the evidence of her preparation. The scene is set for her hands. The table is a landscape of potential, arranged with a military precision that speaks of a mind at peace with order. To the left of the table, 3 beeswax candles stand in a heavy candelabra of beaten iron. The wax is unbleached, a creamy, pale yellow that smells faintly of the hive and the summer clover when the flame warms it. The wicks are trimmed low, ensuring a steady, teardrop-shaped flame that does not flicker. They cast a pool of illumination onto the wood, a circle of clarity in the otherwise dim chamber. Next to the candles, there is a small, ceramic bowl filled with water. The water is still, reflecting the candle flames like tiny, captured stars. This is for the fingers to moisten the thread, to smooth the stray fibers of the silk. Beside the bowl lies the pincushion. It is a small, round object, stuffed tightly with sawdust and covered in a scrap of red velvet. It resembles a ripe berry fallen onto the dark wood. Bristling from its surface are the needles. They are of varying lengths and thicknesses, some gleaming silver, others duller, made of polished bone. There are slender needles for the finest silk, and thicker, sturdier needles for the heavy layers of the bodice. They wait in their velvet bed, upright and ready, a silent forest of steel. And then there are the shears. They are heavy, forged from cold iron, with loops for the fingers that have been wrapped in strips of leather to prevent blisters. The blades are long and terrifyingly sharp, honed on a whetstone until they can slice through the air with a singing sound. They lie closed, their dark metal absorbing the firelight, heavy and authoritative. But the centerpiece of the table, the object that commands the space and the purpose of the night, is the fabric. It has not yet been unrolled. It sits as a bolt, a heavy cylinder of potential wrapped in a protective layer of rough linen. It is heavy, dense, and significant. It is a bolt of winter velvet, a fabric woven in the distant cities of the South but dyed here, in the vats of the castle works. The color is not white, for white is the color of the snow outside and the bride must stand out against the winter. The color is a deep, rich cream, the color of heavy cream rising to the top of the pail, the color of old ivory, the color of the moon when it hangs low and heavy on the horizon. It is a shade that speaks of warmth, of richness, of a light that comes from within. The room is warm. The stone floor is covered with rushes, dried reeds gathered from the riverbank in late autumn. They are mixed with sprigs of dried lavender and meadowsweet, so that when a foot treads upon them, they release a faint, ghostly perfume of the summer past. The scent mingles with the wood smoke and the beeswax, creating an atmosphere that is drowsy and thick. Slowly, the door to the solar creaks open. The hinges are well oiled, so the sound is not a screech but a low groan of timber moving against timber. The seamstress enters. She is a woman of indeterminate age, her face smoothed by the soft light, her movements efficient and practiced. She wears a simple gown of gray wool, scratchy and functional, with a white apron tied about her waist. Her sleeves are rolled up to her elbows, revealing forearms that are accustomed to the work of the cloth. She closes the door behind her, sliding the heavy iron bolt into place with a solid thunk. The world outside, with its snow and its cold, is now fully locked away. There is only the room. There is only the work. She moves to the fire first. This is the ritual. Before the needle, before the thread, the warmth must be tended. She picks up a poker of wrought iron and gently nudges the logs. A shower of orange sparks rises, swirling lazily before vanishing. She selects a new log from the pile, a piece of birch with peeling, papery bark. She places it onto the grate with deliberate care, finding the perfect hollow between the burning embers to nestle it in. The fire accepts the offering, licking at the birch bark, which curls and blackens before catching with a soft whoosh. She stands there for a moment, her hands extended toward the heat, rubbing them together slowly. The friction of skin on skin, the radiant heat of the hearth. She is bringing the sensation back into her fingers, ensuring they are limber and sensitive for the delicate task ahead. Turning from the fire, she approaches the table. She pulls out the wooden chair. It is a high-backed chair, sturdy and rigid, softened only by a thin cushion of flattened goose down. She sits. The wood creaks slightly under her weight, a settling sound that marks the beginning of the session. She takes a deep breath, inhaling the sense of the room, and exhales slowly, her shoulders dropping, the tension of the day draining away into the floorboards. Her eyes focus on the table. She reaches out and adjusts the candelabra, moving it an inch to the right, then an inch back, until the light falls exactly where her hands will be working. She picks up the shears, testing their weight, opening and closing the blades once, snick shhh, listening to the clean sound of the metal sliding against metal. She places them back down, perfectly parallel to the edge of the table. Now she turns her attention to the bolt of fabric. Her hands, warm from the fire, rest on the rough linen outer wrapping. She feels the density of the velvet beneath. It is a heavy cloth, suitable for a winter wedding, capable of blocking out the draft of a cathedral nave. Slowly, methodically, she begins to unpin the linen covering. There are 3 pins, long pins with heads of black glass. She pulls the first one out. It slides free with no resistance. She places it in the ceramic bowl. She pulls the second pin, then the third. With the pins removed, she begins to unroll the linen. The sound is a dry, rasping whisper, the sound of dry grass brushing against stone. As the linen falls away, the velvet is revealed. It catches the candlelight immediately. It is lush. It is deep. The pile of the fabric is thick, absorbing the light and holding it, glowing with that soft, ivory luminescence. She runs her hand over the exposed surface. It is incredibly soft, smoother than skin, cooler than the air in the room, but warming rapidly under her palm. She strokes the fabric once, twice, checking the grain. It is known as stroking the nap. If she brushes one way, the velvet lies flat and shines. If she brushes the other, the fibers stand up, appearing darker and richer. For the bodice, the nap must run upwards to catch the candlelight of the hall. For the skirt, it must run down to flow like water. She unrolls a yard of the fabric. The heavy roll thuds softly as it rotates on the wood. She unrolls another yard, and another. The velvet pools on the table, a landscape of cream-colored dunes. She does not rush. She inspects the selvage edge, the woven border of the cloth, checking for fraying or imperfections. There are none. It is flawless. She reaches for a measuring tape. It is not the plastic tape of the modern era, but a ribbon of marked leather, soft and supple, darkened by the oils of her hands over many years. The markings are inked in black, fading but legible. She lays the leather ribbon across the width of the velvet. She measures the width. She nods. She measures the length of the section she has unrolled. She smooths the tape flat, pressing out the small curls where it was rolled up in her pocket. The room is so quiet that the sound of the leather ribbon sliding across the velvet sounds loud, a distinct swish in the stillness. Outside, the wind shifts slightly, pressing a flurry of snow against the windowpane. It makes a soft hissing sound like sand thrown against glass, a reminder of the cold that makes the warmth inside feel even more precious. The seamstress pauses, listening to the snow, then returns to her work. She needs to cut the first panel. This is the most crucial step. Once the fabric is cut, it cannot be mended without a seam. It requires total commitment. She stands up from her chair, the wood scraping softly on the rushes. She leans over the table, extending the fabric fully flat. She uses polished river stones, smooth and heavy, as weights to hold the corners of the velvet down. She places one stone on the top left corner. Thud. She places a second stone on the top right. thud. She smooths the fabric between them with the flat of her hand, ironing out invisible wrinkles with the pressure of her palm. She places 2 more stones at the bottom corners. The velvet is now a taut, perfect rectangle of cream waiting for the blade. She reaches into the pocket of her apron and withdraws a piece of chalk. It is tailor's chalk, a flat, triangular slab of hard, white clay. It is cool to the touch and leaves a fine, dusty residue on her fingers. She approaches the fabric. She consults a piece of parchment lying to the side where the measurements of the bride are written in a scrolling, careful script. Shoulder to waist, waist to floor, bust, arm site. She memorizes the first number. She leans in close to the fabric, the candlelight illuminating the fine hairs of the velvet pile. She brings the chalk down. She does not draw a continuous line yet. She makes a mark, a small white dash. She moves the measuring tape. She makes another mark, another dash. She is mapping out the constellation of the bodice, a series of white stars on the creamy sky of the cloth. Dash, pause, measure, dash, pause, measure. The rhythm is slow. There is no urgency. The wedding is months away. The winter is long. Tonight is only for the first panel. She moves around the table, her footsteps rustling the dried lavender. The scent rises again, a fleeting memory of purple fields before settling back into the dust. She marks the curve of the neckline. She marks the slope of the shoulder. She marks the intricate curve of the armhole where the sleeve will eventually attach. When the markings are complete, she sets the chalk down. She wipes her hands on a rag to remove the dust. She picks up the shears again. This is the moment of separation. She slides her thumb through the larger leather loop, her fingers through the lower one. She opens the blades. She slides the lower blade under the velvet. The cold steel touches the wood of the table. The fabric lifts slightly, draping over the blade. She aligns the cutting edge with the first series of chalk marks. She takes a breath. She squeezes her hand. Crunch. The sound of shears cutting heavy velvet is distinct. It is not the zip of cutting cotton or the whisper of cutting silk. It is a crunching sound, a crisp, satisfying severance as the sharp iron bites through the dense pile and the woven backing. Crunch, slide, crunch, slide. She cuts slowly, keeping her eye fixed on the chalk line. The shears are heavy and they require a deliberate force to close. She works her way up the side of the bodice panel. The fabric parts falling away to the left and right, leaving a clean, sharp edge. The sound is rhythmic, almost chewing in its consistency. Crunch, crunch, crunch. She reaches the corner and pivots the shears. She cuts along the shoulder line. The excess fabric falls away, sliding off the table and landing on the rush-covered floor with a muffled thump. She continues. The fire pops again, a single loud crack that echoes briefly, but she does not flinch. Her world is the line of white chalk and the closing of the iron blades. She finishes the cut. The back panel of the bodice is free. She sets the shears down. She lifts the piece of velvet she has just harvested. She holds it up to the candlelight. The edges are crisp. The shape is symmetrical. It is a good beginning. She lays the piece down gently, folding it once, then twice, and places it on a separate, smaller table to her right, the finished pile. It is the first layer of the dress, the first brick in the wall of the garment. She sits back down in the chair. She does not immediately reach for the next section. She rests. She looks at the fire. The birch log has burned down to a skeleton of white ash and glowing red charcoal. The heat is steady. She watches the embers pulsing, breathing with the airflow of the room. It is a hypnotic sight, the way the red deepens and brightens, deepens and brightens. She picks up the ceramic bowl of water and dips the tip of her index finger into it. The water is cool. She rubs her finger against her thumb, moistening the skin. She reaches for the needle case. She selects a needle. It is a size 8, a medium length, made of polished steel with a gold-plated eye. It glints in the candlelight, a tiny spear of ambition. She holds the needle up, squinting slightly. She picks up a spool of silk thread. The thread is the same cream color as the velvet, but with a higher sheen. She unspools a length, perhaps 18 inches. She brings the thread to her lips, wetting the end to bind the fibers together. She holds the needle in her left hand, the thread in her right. She brings them together. The thread misses the eye. She pulls back. She tries again. The thread passes through. She pulls it through until the ends are even, then ties a small, intricate knot at the tail end, rolling the silk between her finger and thumb to create the stopper. She sticks the threaded needle into the red velvet pincushion. It stands there, a tiny flag planted on a hill, waiting for its turn. But not yet. The cutting is not finished. She stands up again. She moves the weights. She pulls more fabric from the bolt. The heavy roll turns. Thump. More velvet spills onto the table. She smooths it out. Swish, swish. She places the weights. Thud, thud. The repetition is the point. The task is circular. Measure, mark, cut. Measure, mark, cut. There is no variation, only the slow accumulation of progress. The night deepens. The candle wax drips slowly down the side of the iron stick, freezing into pale stalactites. The seamstress works on, a silent figure in a warm room, while the snow buries the world outside in silence. The first hour has passed. The work has only just begun. The dress is a dream of the future. But the reality of the present is the sound of the fire, the smell of the wax, and the endless, comforting monotony of the velvet. The night deepens, settling into the heavy stones of the keep like a fine, dark silt settling at the bottom of a river. The silence in the solar has gained a new quality. It is no longer just the absence of noise, but a presence in itself. A thick, cotton-wool stillness that fills the corners of the room and muffles the crackle of the hearth. The snow continues to fall outside, invisible now in the pitch black, but its presence is felt in the increasing insulation of the castle. The world is being wrapped in layer upon layer of white, burying the valleys and the hills, sealing the fortress into its own private pocket of time. Inside the solar, the 3 beeswax candles have burned down by perhaps an inch. A small bead of molten wax has escaped the rim of the central candle, sliding slowly down the side of the pale yellow column. It moves with a glacial slowness, cooling as it travels, until it hardens into a translucent droplet, frozen in its descent. The seamstress watches it for a moment, her eyes tracing the path of the wax, her mind empty of thought, filled only with the quiet observation of these small, physical laws. She remains seated in the high-backed wooden chair, her hands resting on the dark walnut table. The first panel of the wedding dress, the back of the bodice, lies folded on the side table, a creamy rectangle of potential. But the work is far from done. The bolt of velvet remains heavy and waiting, a reservoir of fabric that must be measured and divided. Before she begins the next cut, she attends to her tools. The tailor's chalk, that triangular slab of white clay, has been dulled by the friction of the velvet. The sharp edge she used to mark the shoulder line has been worn down to a rounded bluff. Precision requires sharpness. Precision requires maintenance. She opens a small drawer in the table, the wood sliding against wood with a dry shhh clack. Inside, nestled among spools of colored thread and spare thimbles, lies a small paring knife. It is an old tool, the handle made of polished antler, smooth and yellowed with age, the blade short and curved like a hawk's beak. She takes it out. She picks up the chalk. Holding the chalk over the ceramic bowl to catch the dust, she begins to sharpen the edge. She draws the knife across the clay. Scrape. A fine white powder falls into the water, dissolving instantly into a milky cloud. Scrape. She turns the chalk. Scrape. The sound is dry and rhythmic, like a cricket rubbing its legs together in dry grass, but slower, much slower. She works methodically, shaving away the rounded edge until the chalk is once again a pristine, sharp wedge, capable of drawing a line as fine as a hair. She wipes the blade of the knife on her apron, replaces it in the drawer, and slides the drawer shut. Clack shhh. Her throat feels dry. The heat of the fire, while comforting, devours the moisture in the air. On a small trivet near the hearth, a pewter pitcher has been sitting, keeping warm near the embers. She rises from the chair, the rushes shifting under her leather soles with a soft crunching sound, and moves to the fireplace. She picks up a heavy earthenware cup from the mantel. It is rough pottery, glazed in a speckled brown, simple and sturdy. She lifts the pewter pitcher. It is hot to the touch, radiating the stored energy of the fire. She pours. The liquid is a posset, hot milk curdled with ale and spiced with nutmeg and honey. It flows thickly into the cup, releasing a plume of steam that smells of dairy and sweet grain, a scent that speaks of barns and kitchens and safe, warm places. She fills the cup only halfway. She sets the pitcher down and wraps her hands around the earthenware. The warmth seeps into her palms, thawing the slight stiffness that had begun to set in. She takes a sip. It is thick, sweet, and coating. She swallows, feeling the warmth travel down her chest, settling in her stomach like a heavy, golden stone. She stands there for a long minute, just breathing the steam, watching the firelight play on the surface of the milk. Refreshed, she returns to the table. It is time for the front panels. The bodice of the winter dress will be structured, tight-fitting to hold the heavy skirts that will follow. It requires 2 front panels, left and right, which will lace together. These pieces are more complex than the back. They must curve to accommodate the bust. They must taper at the waist, and they must flare slightly at the hips. The geometry is subtle. She pulls the bolt of velvet toward her again. She unrolls another expanse of the cream fabric. The pile catches the light differently now as the angle changes, shimmering with a pearlescent glow. She smooths it down with both hands, starting from the center and pushing outwards. Swish, swish. She pushes the air bubbles out from beneath the heavy cloth, ensuring it lies perfectly flat against the walnut wood. If the fabric ripples, the cut will be crooked. If the cut is crooked, the dress is ruined. There is no room for error, and so there is no room for haste. She places the river stone weights again. Thud, thud, thud. She picks up the sharpened chalk. She consults the parchment measurements again. She dips the tip of her finger in the water bowl and wipes it across the chalk to dampen it slightly. This helps the mark sit on the velvet without brushing off too easily. She begins to draw. She marks the center front line. This must be a straight line, perfectly parallel to the selvage edge. She lays the leather measuring tape down as a guide. She draws the chalk down the side of the tape. The line appears, stark white against the cream, a ghostly boundary. Now the curves. She marks the neck point. She measures down for the bust point. She marks the waist. She connects these dots not with a straight edge, but with the practiced arc of her hand. The chalk moves in a gentle sweep, creating the silhouette of the female form on the flat table. It is a slow process of geometry and anticipation. She draws the armscye, the curve where the sleeve will go. It is deeper in the front than the back. She draws it carefully, deepening the curve by fractions of an inch until it looks correct to her eye. She steps back, she looks at the outline. She tilts her head to the left. She tilts her head to the right. She steps forward and thickens the waist mark by a millimeter. She is satisfied. She picks up the shears. The iron is cool again. She warms the handles in her grip for a moment before engaging. She slides the blade under the velvet. Crunch. The cutting begins again. This time the path is more winding. The shears must navigate the curve of the armhole. She turns the fabric slightly, pivoting it around the heavy blade rather than twisting her wrist. The sound of the cutting is the only sound in the world. Crunch, slide, crunch, slide. The excess fabric falls away, curling onto the table like shavings of cream-colored wood. She cuts the shoulder slope. She cuts the side seam. She cuts the bottom hem. The left front panel is free. She lifts it. It is lighter than the back panel, a slender shape of elegance. She lays it gently on top of the back panel on the side table. They rest there together, the components of a future whole. Now she must cut the right front panel, but she cannot simply measure and cut again. The velvet has a nap, a direction. If she were to flip the pattern piece over to cut the mirror image, the nap would run in the opposite direction. One side of the bodice would look dark, the other light. This is the trap of velvet. It demands vigilance. She must measure the right panel separately, ensuring the top of the piece is at the top of the fabric bolt. She unrolls more fabric. Thump, roll, thump. She repeats the smoothing process. Her hands glide over the surface. The sensation is soothing, the endless softness of the pile numbing the nerve endings in a pleasant, repetitive way. She checks the grain. She places the weights. She takes the first front panel, the one she just cut, and lays it face up on the new velvet. She cannot flip it face down. She must use it as a visual guide, but she must draw the mirror image freehand, measuring every point again to ensure symmetry. She measures the waist, mark. She measures the bust, mark. She measures the shoulder, mark. The repetition is hypnotic. There is no new information here, only the reconfirmation of the old. The world narrows down to inches and quarters of inches. The fire pops, a soft explosion of sap, but she does not look up. Her universe is the grid of the fabric. She finishes marking the right panel. She checks the symmetry against the left panel. They are twins, separated only by the time it took to draw them. She takes up the shears. The leather wrapping on the handles is warm now, molded to the shape of her fingers. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The shears bite through the heavy cloth. The sound is consistent, a reliable friction that marks the passage of time. She cuts the long, straight line of the center front. She cuts the winding curve of the side seam. The final snip detaches the piece. She sets the shears down. She places the right panel on the stack. The bodice is now rough cut, 3 pieces of velvet resting in the shadows. She sits back in the chair and exhales, a long, slow breath that flutters the flame of the nearest candle. She feels a dull ache in the small of her back from leaning over the table. She reaches around and massages the muscles there, her knuckles kneading the wool of her gown. It is a good ache, the ache of work done, of progress made. She looks at the fire. It has burned down further. The logs are now a landscape of glowing red canyons and peaks of white ash. It needs tending. She does not rush. She watches the heat waves shimmering above the grate for a while, mesmerizing in their dance. Then slowly she stands. She walks to the woodpile stacked neatly against the stone wall. The logs here are cold, bringing the chill of the outside woods into the room. She selects a log of ash wood. Ash is good burning wood. It burns hot and slow, even when green, though this wood is well seasoned. The bark is smooth and gray, like the skin of an elephant. She carries it to the hearth. She uses the iron poker to create a bed for the new log, pushing the red embers into a pile in the center. She lays the ash log on top. The embers hiss slightly as they touch the cold bark. Smoke begins to curl around the wood, gray and acrid, before a small tongue of blue flame licks up the side. The fire accepts the fuel. The light in the room shifts, brightening as the new wood catches, casting longer, sharper shadows across the floor. She returns to the table, but not to the chair. She remains standing. The cutting of the bodice is done, but the table is littered with cabbage, the scraps of fabric left over from the cutting. These cannot be wasted. Velvet is too precious. She brings over a woven willow basket. It is a deep basket lined with plain linen. She begins to pick up the scraps. There are long, thin strips from the selvage edges. There are triangular wedges from the side seams. There are small, irregular snippings. She gathers them all. She handles them with the same care she gave the main panels. She takes a long strip and rolls it around her finger, creating a small rose-like shape just to test the drape. Then she unrolls it and places it in the basket. These scraps will be used later. They might become covered buttons. They might become the stuffing for a small pillow. They might be pieced together to line a pouch. In the winter, nothing is discarded. She sweeps the table with the side of her hand, gathering the lint and the dust. She cups it in her palm and walks to the fire, tossing the small ball of gray fluff into the flames. It flares up instantly, a tiny, silent flash of light that is gone in a second. The table is clear. The velvet bolt is still large, hardly diminished by the removal of the bodice pieces. The dress will be voluminous. The skirt will require yards and yards of cloth, but that is a task for later. She sits down again. She needs to secure the edges of the pieces she has cut. Velvet frays. If left alone, the cut edges will shed tiny fibers, unraveling slowly. She must whip the edges, a temporary stitch to hold the weave together until the final sewing. She pulls the stack of 3 velvet panels toward her. She takes the top one, the back panel. She places it on her lap. The weight of the fabric is pleasant on her legs, a warm, heavy blanket. She checks her needle. It is still threaded with the cream silk. She ties a fresh knot in the end. She holds the edge of the velvet between her thumb and forefinger. She inserts the needle from the back, pulling it through to the front. She loops the thread over the raw edge and inserts the needle from the back again, a fraction of an inch further along. This is the whip stitch. It is not meant to be beautiful. It is meant to be functional. Poke, pull, loop, poke, pull, loop. The motion is small and economic. Her hand moves in a tiny circle. The thread makes a soft zip sound as it passes through the dense fabric. The fire crackles. The snow presses against the window. The candle flickers. She works her way down the side of the bodice panel. The stitches are evenly spaced, a testament to years of practice. She does not need to look closely. Her fingers know the distance. She falls into a trance, the rhythm of the stitching matching the rhythm of her breathing. Poke, pull, loop. The thread creates a spiral binding around the edge of the velvet, locking the fibers in place. It is a slow fortification, a microscopic wall built of silk to protect the integrity of the garment. She reaches the corner and turns. She continues along the bottom edge. The room seems to grow warmer. The ash log is burning well now, throwing out a steady, radiant heat. The smell of the posset still lingers in the air, mixing with the scent of the heated dust and the beeswax. Her eyelids feel heavy, but her hands do not stop. They are machines of habit, independent of her fatigue. She finishes the perimeter of the back panel. She ties off the thread with a double knot and snips it with the small embroidery scissors that hang on a ribbon around her neck. Snip. She lays the protected panel aside. She rethreads the needle. She picks up the left front panel. She begins again. Poke, pull, loop. There is no rush. The night is long. The winter is endless. The dress is a journey of 1,000 stitches, and she has only just begun to walk the path. The silence wraps around her, a comfortable, heavy shawl, as she sews the winter hours away. The snow outside has begun to drift. Driven by a wind that has finally descended from the mountain peaks, the white powder is banking up against the stone base of the keep, creating soft, undulating ramps that reach toward the lower arrow slits. The sound of the wind is a low, mournful hum, a vibration that can be felt in the teeth more than heard with the ears. It presses against the thick glass of the solar's single window, a constant, invisible pressure that seeks entrance but finds none. Inside, the sanctuary of the room holds firm. The air is still, heavy with the scent of the slowly burning ash log and the sweet, lingering aroma of the beeswax. The seamstress has finished the whip-stitching of the second panel. The motion of poke, pull, loop has ceased for the moment. She sets the panel down atop its siblings, the velvet settling with a hushed sigh. She flexes her fingers, opening and closing her hand slowly. The joints pop softly, a sound no louder than the cracking of a dry twig. She rotates her wrists, first clockwise, then counterclockwise, feeling the tendons stretch and release the tension of the repetitive work. She turns her attention to the candles. They have burned low again, and the wicks have grown long and curled, creating a carbon buildup that causes the flames to dance too vigorously. A dancing flame casts moving shadows, and moving shadows are the enemy of precision. She reaches for the candle snuffer and trimmer, a scissor-like tool made of brass that rests on the base of the candelabra. It has a small box attached to the blades to catch the trimmed wick, preventing the charred remnant from falling into the molten wax. She positions the trimmer over the first candle. Snip. The blackened curl of wick is severed and caught in the brass box. The flame dips low, blue and small for a second before springing back up, brighter and steadier than before. She moves to the second candle. Snip. And the third. Snip. She empties the trimmings into the fire where they vanish instantly. The light in the room stabilizes, returning to a calm, golden constant. Now begins the assembly. The whip-stitching was merely preparation. The pinning is the beginning of union. She must join the back panel to the two front panels at the side seams and the shoulders. She clears the center of the table again, moving the pincushion and the scissors to the far corner. She takes the back panel, the largest piece, and lays it flat on the walnut surface, the pile of the velvet facing upward. She runs her hand over it, smoothing the nap down. It feels like stroking the coat of a well-groomed horse, sleek and warm. She takes the left front panel. She must place it on top of the back panel with the right sides touching, velvet against velvet. This is a delicate operation. Velvet is a treacherous fabric to sew. The pile of one piece interlocks with the pile of the other, acting like thousands of tiny, soft teeth. If she is not careful, the fabrics will creep or shift against each other as she works, resulting in a twisted seam. She aligns the bottom hem first. She leans close, her eyes level with the table, ensuring the raw edges are perfectly flush. She presses the two layers together with her thumb. The friction of the pile holds them tentatively in place. She reaches for a pin. She pulls it from the red velvet cushion. It is a long pin, sharp and slender. She positions it perpendicular to the edge of the fabric. She pushes the point through the top layer of velvet. It meets the resistance of the dense weave. She pushes harder. The pin slides through the first layer, crosses the invisible gap between the piles, and pierces the bottom layer. She angles the point back up, bringing it out through the surface again. In, down, up, out. The head of the pin, a small bead of black glass, rests against the cream velvet. It looks like a tiny eye watching the work. She moves her hand 2 inches up the seam. She aligns the edges again, patting them gently to mesh the fibers. She takes another pin. In, down, up, out. The sound is microscopic, a faint rasp of metal against fiber. It is a sound that can only be heard in a room as quiet as this, a room buried in snow. She continues up the side seam. The process is slow. Every 2 inches a pin, every pin a check for alignment. She is building a spine of steel along the edge of the fabric. The pins gleam in the candlelight, a row of silver soldiers standing guard over the seam. When she reaches the armhole, the curve makes the pinning more difficult. The fabric wants to buckle. She must ease the front panel onto the back panel, distributing the excess fullness so that it will lie flat when sewn. She uses the tip of the pin to manipulate the cloth, nudging a fraction of a millimeter here, a fraction there, until the curve is smooth. She pins it securely. The left side is pinned, now the right. She walks around the table to the other side. She repeats the process. Lay the panel down, right sides together, smooth the pile, align the hem. In, down, up, out. The repetition is soothing. It requires focus but not deep thought. It is a meditation of the hands. The world outside does not exist. The politics of the realm do not exist. There is only the cream velvet, the black-headed pins, and the straight line of the seam. She reaches the shoulder seams. These are short, only a few inches wide, but they carry the weight of the entire dress. She pins them with double the frequency, a pin every inch. They must be strong. The bodice is now fully pinned together. It looks like a deflated torso lying on the table, a ghost of a garment held together by friction and steel. But pins are temporary. They prick the fingers. They fall out. Before the permanent sewing can happen, the garment must be basted. Basting is a temporary stitch, made with long, loose loops of thread, designed to hold the layers firmly in place so the final stitching can be precise. It is the scaffolding of the dress. She opens the drawer again. She selects a different spool of thread. This is not the precious silk she used for the whip stitching. This is unbleached cotton thread, slightly thicker with a duller finish. It is strong but breakable, meant to be pulled out later. She cuts a long length, perhaps a yard. She does not wax this thread. She wants it to have friction to grab the velvet. She threads a larger needle, a darner, with a longer eye. She starts at the bottom of the left side seam, just below the first pin. She knots the thread, a large, clumsy knot that will be easy to grip and cut later. She inserts the needle. Crunch. The larger needle makes a more distinct sound as it passes through the 4 layers of whip-stitched velvet. She pulls the thread through. It makes a dry, hissing noise, distinct from the silent glide of the silk. She takes a stitch. It is a long stitch, half an inch in length. She pulls the thread, but not too tight. The fabric must breathe. She moves up. Another stitch. As she approaches the first pin, she removes it. She slides the pin out of the fabric and drops it into the ceramic bowl. Clink. Stitch, pull, remove pin, clink, stitch, pull, remove pin, clink. The rhythm is established. The row of pins slowly disappears, replaced by a dashed line of cotton thread. The basting stitch is white against the cream velvet, clearly visible. It is a map for the final seam. The fire pops again, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. The seamstress pauses. The room has cooled slightly as the night wears on. The stone walls are leaching the heat from the air. She feels a draft on the back of her neck, a ghostly finger of cold air that has found its way through a crack in the shutters. She sets the needle down, pushing it into the fabric to secure it. She stands and walks to the wooden chest at the foot of the Solar's daybed. She lifts the heavy lid. Inside are piled woolens and furs. She pulls out a shawl. It is knitted from gray wool, thick and coarse, smelling of lavender and cedar chest. She wraps it around her shoulders, crossing it over her chest and tying the ends behind her back. The wool is scratchy against her neck, but the warmth is immediate. It feels like a hug. She returns to the table. She picks up the needle. Stitch, pull, remove pin, clink. She works her way up the side seam, navigating the curve of the armhole again. The basting thread holds the curve perfectly. The velvet is tamed. She finishes the left side. She ties off the thread with 2 quick loops and cuts it. She moves to the right side. The process repeats. The monotony is the point. The dress is not formed by magic. It is formed by thousands of small, boring movements. It is formed by patience. As she bastes the right shoulder seam, her mind drifts to the wedding itself. It will be in the great hall. The torches will be lit. The floor will be strewn with fresh pine boughs, scenting the air with sharp green resin. The bride will walk down the aisle, the cream velvet glowing in the firelight. The guests will see the dress, the sweep of the skirt, the fit of the bodice. They will not see the basting thread. They will not see the whip stitching. They will not see the hours spent in the solar while the snow buried the world. They will see only the perfection. But the perfection is built here, in the quiet, stitch by stitch. She finishes the basting. The last pin clinks into the bowl. The bodice is now a single unit, held together by the white cotton thread. She lifts it from the table. It has weight now. It hangs from her hands, a shapeless tube of velvet. It needs form. It needs a body. In the corner of the room, standing in the shadows like a silent servant, is the dress form. It is a tailor's dummy, a torso made of stiffened canvas stuffed with horsehair and sawdust, mounted on a turned wooden stand. The canvas is stained with watermarks and old pinpricks, a map of dresses past. It has no head, no arms, only the suggestion of a neck and shoulders. She walks over to it. She drags it into the circle of candlelight. The wooden base scrapes heavily on the floorboards where the rushes have thinned. Scrape thud. She lifts the basted bodice. She opens the front panels. They are not yet joined, as the dress will lace up the front. She wraps the velvet around the canvas form. She slides the armholes over the shoulders of the dummy. She pulls the panels around to the front. The velvet hugs the padded curves of the form. Instantly, the fabric transforms. It is no longer a flat piece of cloth. It is a garment. The light catches the curves of the bust, the nap of the velvet gleaming with a liquid depth. The shadows pool in the hollow of the waist. She steps back. She clasps her hands in front of her apron. She observes. The fit is good. The side seams hang straight, following the line of the dummy's ribs. The shoulder slope is correct. The armholes sit high and snug, waiting for the sleeves. But the front is open. It gapes. It needs to be held closed to truly judge the fit. She returns to the table and picks up a handful of pins. She walks back to the dummy. She pulls the left front panel and the right front panel together at the center. She overlaps them slightly, simulating where the lacing will pull them tight. She pins the front closed, push, wiggle, push. The pins go into the canvas dummy with a dull, thudding sound quite different from the sound of pinning fabric to fabric. The canvas is hard and unyielding. It takes force. She pins the waist, she pins the bust, she pins the neck. She steps back again. The bodice stands before her, a headless, armless ghost in cream velvet. It is a shell of the bride. The seamstress walks slowly around the form. The rushes crunch softly under her feet. She checks the back. It is smooth, a broad expanse of unblemished velvet. She checks the sides. No puckering, no twisting. It is perfect. She reaches out and touches the velvet on the dummy's shoulder. It is warm, having absorbed the heat of the room and the heat of her handling. She brushes a piece of lint from the neckline. The bodice is ready for the permanent stitching, but that requires a different mindset, a different focus. The basting was the sketch, the sewing is the ink. She looks at the window. The snow is piled halfway up the glass now. The world is disappearing. The silence is absolute. She walks back to the fire. The ash log has finally broken apart, collapsing into a heap of glowing coals. It is time for a new log. She chooses oak this time, a thick, dark, heavy piece of oak, bark rough and craggy. She places it on the coals. It smolders, dark smoke rising before the heat beneath ignites the bottom. A steady, yellow flame begins to lick up the side of the wood. She picks up the pewter pitcher. The posset is lukewarm now, but still comforting. She pours the rest of it into her earthenware cup. She sits in the high-backed chair, but she turns it to face the fire. She holds the cup in both hands, letting the ceramic warm her palms. She sips the drink. It is sweet, spiced, and heavy. She watches the dress form out of the corner of her eye. The cream velvet glows in the peripheral firelight, a silent presence in the room. She rests, her eyes close for a moment. The sound of the fire, the soft hiss of sap, the settle of the wood, the gentle roar of the draft fills her ears. The snow presses against the walls. The castle sleeps. The valley sleeps. Only the seamstress and the fire are awake, keeping the vigil of the winter night. The work will continue, but for a moment there is only the warmth, the taste of nutmeg, and the satisfaction of the basted seam. The oak log in the hearth has settled into a deep, steady burn. Unlike the birch, which flared with enthusiasm, or the ash, which burned with a clean and bright consistency, the oak is stubborn and enduring. It consumes itself slowly, glowing with a dark, intense red heat that pulses from the very center of the wood. The bark has not yet fully surrendered. It remains as a charred, alligator skin shell holding the molten interior together. The heat it throws is substantial, a solid wall of warmth that pushes against the encroaching chill of the stone room. The seamstress sits for a moment longer, the empty earthenware cup resting on her knee. The last drop of the warm posset has been consumed, leaving only a faint, sweet residue at the bottom of the mug and a comfortable heaviness in her stomach. She runs her thumb over the rim of the cup, feeling the rough texture of the fired clay. It is a grounding sensation, a reminder of the earth in a room dominated by the ethereal softness of velvet and the intangible drifting of snow. She sighs, a soft exhalation that mingles with the draft of the room and sets the cup down on the stone hearth. It makes a dull clink as it touches the flagstone. It is time to return to the work. The bodice, currently pinned and basted onto the dress form, waits in the shadows. It is a shell, a sketch of a garment, holding its shape only by the tension of the temporary cotton threads and the friction of the velvet pile. To become a dress, it must be solidified. It must be made permanent. She rises from the chair, her joints moving stiffly after the rest. She stretches her arms overhead, her shadow stretching long and thin across the ceiling beams, dancing briefly in the firelight. She walks to the dress form. She begins to remove the pins that held the front closed. Pull, wiggle, release. The pins come free from the canvas torso with a little resistance. She places them back into the red velvet cushion on the table. When the last pin is removed, the bodice falls open like a vest. She carefully lifts it from the shoulders of the dummy. The velvet is warm where it touched the canvas, retaining a ghost of the room's heat. She carries the garment back to the table and lays it flat, turning it inside out. The inside of the bodice is a map of construction. The raw edges of the seams, whip-stitched in silk, stand up like little ridges. The white cotton basting threads run in dashed lines, marking the path she must now follow with the permanent stitch. She sits. She adjusts the candelabra, pulling it closer. The three flames lean in unison as she moves the iron stand, then straighten, casting a focused pool of light on the work area. She needs the best light for this. She is about to begin the backstitch. The backstitch is the strongest of all hand stitches. It does not stretch. It does not break. It is the stitch used for seams that must bear the strain of lacing and the weight of heavy skirts. It creates a line of thread that is continuous on the top side and overlapping on the underside, a chain of silk that locks the fabric together with an unbreakable grip. She opens the drawer and retrieves a new spool of the cream silk thread. She also takes out a small, round object, a cake of beeswax. The wax is old, the color of dark amber, and it smells of honey and pollen. Its surface is crisscrossed with hundreds of fine grooves, the tracks of threads from dresses past. She cuts a length of silk thread, measuring it against her arm, from fingertips to elbow and back again. A yard of thread. Any longer and it will tangle. Any shorter and she will have to rethread too often. She holds the thread against the cake of wax. She presses her thumb down, burying the filament into the beeswax. She pulls. The thread zips through under her thumb, cutting a new groove into the wax. She pulls the entire length through. ZZZZZZT. The sound is sharp and satisfying. She does it again. ZZZZZZT. Now the silk is coated in a fine, invisible layer of wax. This makes it stronger. It makes it stiffer, less likely to knot or fray as it passes through the abrasive velvet. It also helps the thread grip the fabric, sealing the puncture holes against moisture. She runs the thread through her fingers, the heat of her skin melting the wax slightly, smoothing it into the fibers of the silk. It feels wiry and disciplined. She threads the needle. She ties the knot at the end. She begins at the waistline of the left side seam. She pushes the needle through from the back to the front, bringing it out exactly on the line of the white basting thread. She pulls the thread through until the knot catches securely on the back. Now the rhythm begins. She moves the needle backward to the right, inserting it a small distance behind where the thread emerged, perhaps an eighth of an inch. This is the back step. She pushes the point deep into the velvet, angling it forward to emerge an eighth of an inch ahead of the original emergence point. In back, under, out, forward. She pulls the thread. It tightens. The first stitch appears on the surface, a tiny, perfect dash of cream silk, sunk deep into the pile of the velvet. She repeats the motion. She inserts the needle into the exact hole made by the previous stitch's end. She goes back into the same point, pushing forward again, advancing the line. Pierce, slide, pull. The sound is different now. The waxed silk moving through the velvet makes a soft thwip sound, followed by a dull tug as she sets the tension. It is a darker, more solid sound than the basting. It sounds like permanence. Pierce, slide, pull, thwip, tug. She works her way up the seam. The stitches are microscopic, uniform, and relentless. They look like a line of machine stitching, but they possess the soul of the hand. Each stitch is a decision. Each stitch is a commitment. The velvet is no longer two pieces of fabric held together by hope. It is becoming one piece of fabric, fused by silk. The room is silent save for the fire and the sewing. The wind outside has dropped, leaving only the falling snow. The silence is so profound that the seamstress can hear the friction of the thread against the eye of the needle, a tiny squeak of metal on silk. She reaches the first inch of the seam. She stops. She picks up the small embroidery scissors. She snips the white basting thread in 3 places. She pulls the loose cotton ends out. Snap, slide. The white scaffolding is removed, revealing the permanent cream seam beneath. It is tight. It is straight. It vanishes into the nap of the velvet, visible only as a faint depression in the plush surface. She continues, inch by inch. The world shrinks down to the point of the needle. There is no castle, no winter, no wedding. There is only the seam. Pierce, slide, pull, thwip, tug. Her breathing synchronizes with the stitching. Inhale on the insertion. Exhale on the pull. It is a slow, yogic rhythm that slows the heart and calms the mind. The tension in her shoulders, which had returned when she stood up, melts away again. The repetition is a balm. She reaches the curve of the armhole. This is tricky. She must keep the stitches small to navigate the arc without puckering. She slows down. The stitches become half the size, tiny specks of silk. She turns the fabric constantly, easing the curve flat under the needle. Pierce, slide, pull. The needle glints in the candlelight, a silver metronome marking time. Up and down, back and forward. The wax on the thread warms up as it passes through the friction of the fabric, releasing a faint scent of honey that drifts up to her nose. It mixes with the scent of the lavender in the rushes and the wood smoke from the hearth. It is the smell of industry and comfort. She finishes the left side seam. She ties off the thread with a complex knot, looping the needle through the last stitch 3 times to lock it. She cuts the thread. She inspects the work. She runs her fingernail along the seam line. It is flat. It is strong. She pulls on the 2 panels, testing the strength. The seam does not give. It is solid. She pauses to thread the needle again. She cuts a new length of silk. She waxes it. ZZZZZZT. ZZZZZZT. She rolls it between her fingers. The ritual is as important as the sewing. It resets the mind. It prepares the hands. She starts on the right side seam. Pierce, slide, pull. The fire in the hearth shifts. The oak log has burned through in the middle, and the 2 ends collapse into the bed of coals with a soft, crumbling sound. A cloud of orange sparks rises, illuminating the chimney breast for a fleeting second before vanishing into the soot-dark throat of the flue. The light in the room dims slightly as the flame dies down to a glow. The seamstress does not get up immediately. She finishes the stitch she is on. Then, she secures the needle in the pincushion. She stands and walks to the fire. She takes the iron poker and pushes the two halves of the oak log together. They glow angrily where they touch, the heat intensifying. She adds a new log, this one of beech wood. The beech is smooth-barked and dense. It will burn with a bright, steady flame, good for working late. She places it carefully, bridging the gap between the two glowing oak embers. She turns and walks to the window. The heavy velvet curtains are drawn back, but the glass is dark. She presses her face close to the pane. It is cold, radiating a chill that nips at her nose. Outside, she can see nothing but the swirling white. The snow has piled up on the ledge, covering the bottom third of the glass. The world is being buried. The castle is an island in a sea of white. The isolation is complete. There is no one coming. There is no one going. There is only the here and the now. She turns back to the warmth of the room. The contrast is delicious. The biting cold of the glass against her face, the enveloping heat of the fire on her back. She rubs her arms, feeling the friction of the wool sleeves of her gown. She returns to the table. She sits. She picks up the needle. The right seam waits. Pierce, slide, pull, thwip, tug. She sews the right side seam. She sews the shoulder seams. These are thicker, with more layers of canvas interlining to support the weight of the sleeves. The needle requires more force. She uses a thimble. The thimble is silver, dented and scratched from years of use. It fits snugly on her middle finger. She uses it to push the eye of the needle through the dense layers. Push. The metal clicks against the metal of the needle. It is a hard, mechanical sound. Push, slide, pull. The shoulder seams are finished. The bodice is now structurally sound. She removes the last of the white basting threads. She picks them off the velvet like removing lint, rolling them into a small ball and placing them in the waste basket. The bodice lies on the table, a dark cream shadow. It is beautiful in its incompleteness, but it is raw on the inside. It needs a lining. The velvet is too scratchy to sit against the bride's skin. It needs a layer of silk or fine linen to separate the body from the structure. She stands and moves to a chest against the far wall. This chest is made of cedar to repel moths. She lifts the lid. The scent of cedarwood billows out, sharp and resinous, clearing her head. Inside are stacks of folded fabrics. She runs her hand down the pile until she finds what she needs. It is a bolt of fine linen, bleached white, as soft as water. It has been washed many times and beaten with wooden paddles until the fibers are broken down and supple. It feels cool to the touch, slippery and smooth. She lifts the bolt out. It is lighter than the velvet, airy and manageable. She carries it to the table. She clears the velvet bodice away, hanging it carefully on the back of the chair. She unrolls the linen on the table. It makes a crisp, rustling sound like dry leaves skittering on a stone path. Rustle, crinkle. She needs to cut the lining pieces. They must be identical to the velvet pieces she just sewed. She does not need the parchment measurements this time. She can use the velvet panels as templates. She lays the linen flat. She irons it with the pressure of her hands, smoothing out the fold lines. She takes the velvet bodice and lays it on top of the linen. She flattens it out. She picks up the chalk. She traces around the shape of the bodice. The chalk drags on the linen, making a dry, scratching sound. Scritch, scratch. She leaves a small allowance for the seams. She traces the back. She traces the front left. She traces the front right. She picks up the shears. The sound of cutting linen is distinct. It is a sharp tearing sound. Snip, rip, snip. It is faster than cutting velvet. The blades fly through the thin fabric. A snip, 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 snip. The sound is quick and light, a staccato rhythm against the slow adagio of the velvet work. She cuts the 3 pieces of lining. They float on the table, ghosts of the velvet shell. She sets the shears down. She gathers the linen pieces. They are cool in her hands. She folds them neatly and places them on the side table. The night has marched on. The beeswax candles have burned down past the halfway mark. The wax has pooled in the drip trays, hardening into puddles of pale yellow. The seamstress feels the fatigue settling in her shoulders, a heavy, comfortable weight. But it is not a painful fatigue. It is the fatigue of usage, of a body doing what it knows how to do. She looks at the fire. The beech log is burning brightly, casting dancing shadows that flicker across the tapestries on the walls. The figures in the tapestries, the hunters and the feasters, seem to move in the corner of her eye, participating in the silent activity of the room. She sits back in her chair, interlacing her fingers in her lap. She watches the flame of the nearest candle. It stands tall and straight, burning without a flicker in the still air. The blue heart of the flame is dark and mysterious, the yellow tip bright and cheerful. She watches it for a long time, her breathing slowing, her eyelids growing heavy. The sewing of the winter wedding dress is a long road, but the bodice is sewn. The lining is cut. The foundation is laid. The snow continues to fall, burying the keep, burying the valley, burying the world in a blanket of silence. And inside, the work waits, patient and eternal. The deep night has wrapped the stone keep in a layer of isolation, so profound it feels as though the rest of the world has simply ceased to exist. Outside the thick, leaded glass of the solar window, the universe has been reduced to a swirling vortex of white and gray. The snow, driven by a wind that has grown tired and steady, piles up against the masonry in soft, sculpted drifts that resemble the dunes of a frozen desert. There is no moon visible, only the diffuse, pale luminescence of the snow itself, reflecting the nothingness of the sky. Inside the solar, the atmosphere is a sharp contrast to the frozen void. It is a capsule of warmth, scented with the resinous tang of the burning beech log and the dry, dusty smell of heated linen. The 3 beeswax candles in the iron candelabra have burned down past their midpoint, the flames sitting lower now, casting long, wavering shadows that stretch across the floorboards and climb the tapestried walls. The light is golden and intimate, illuminating only the center of the room, the walnut table, the high-backed chair, and the hands of the seamstress. She sits with a posture of practiced ease, her spine straight but not rigid, her shoulders relaxed. On the table before her lie the 3 pieces of white linen she cut in the previous hour. They are the ghosts of the velvet bodice, pale and light, waiting to be given form. The velvet bodice itself hangs over the back of the chair, a dark cream presence, heavy and finished for the moment. Now the lining must be constructed. The lining is the unsung hero of the garment. It will never be seen by the wedding guests. It will be hidden against the skin of the bride, a secret layer of softness that separates the body from the structure of the heavy dress. It must be perfect, not for vanity, but for comfort. The seamstress picks up the back panel of the linen lining. She takes the left front panel of linen. She places them together, right sides touching, aligning the raw edges of the side seam. The linen is cool to the touch, smooth and crisp, unlike the plush warmth of the velvet. It rustles as she handles it, a sound like dry parchment or autumn leaves, much louder and sharper than the whisper of the velvet. She does not pin this seam. The linen is stable. The friction of the weave holds the layers together well enough for her experienced hands. She threads her needle with a finer thread this time, a bleached linen thread that matches the fabric perfectly. She waxes it lightly, zip, zip, less for strength and more to prevent tangling. She begins to sew. She uses a running stitch combined with a backstitch, 3 running stitches forward, 1 backstitch to lock it. Dip, up, back. The needle pops through the linen. Pop, pop, pop. The sound is percussive, a tiny heartbeat of steel against flax. The fabric offers a crisp resistance, then yields suddenly. It is faster work than the velvet. There is no pile to fight, no thickness to push through. The needle flies. Dip, up, back. She sews the left side seam. She sews the right side seam. She sews the shoulder seams. The linen bodice takes shape quickly, a flimsy, white version of the velvet shell. It collapses on the table, lacking the stiffness of the outer layer. Now comes the most critical step in the construction of the bodice, the pressing. A seam that is not pressed is a clumsy thing. It bulges. It pulls. It prevents the garment from lying flat. In the world of fine sewing, the iron is as important as the needle. The seamstress stands. She moves to the hearth. To the side of the fire, resting on a flat stone trivet, sits the iron. It is not the electric device of the future, nor even the hollow box filled with coals. It is a sad iron, a solid block of cast iron, shaped like a teardrop with a thick, curved handle. It is heavy, weighing perhaps 6 pounds. It has been sitting near the fire for an hour, absorbing the heat of the beech logs. She reaches for a thick pad of folded wool, a holder to protect her hand. She grasps the handle of the iron. It is hot. She can feel the radiation of the metal through the wool. She lifts it. The weight is substantial. She carries it to the table. But she cannot simply iron on the wooden surface. She needs a pressing board. She reaches under the table and pulls out a long, narrow board covered in layers of old blanket and topped with a sheet of smooth, unbleached muslin. She places this on the table. She also retrieves a seam roll. This is a tightly stuffed sausage of fabric, filled with sawdust until it is rock hard, covered in wool. It is used to press seams open without creasing the rest of the fabric. She lays the linen bodice over the seam roll, positioning the side seam along the spine of the roll. The seam allowance stands up like a ridge. She dips her fingers into the ceramic bowl of water and flicks droplets onto the linen. Splatter. The water creates dark spots on the white fabric. She brings the iron close to her cheek to test the heat. It radiates a fierce, dry warmth. It is ready. She lowers the iron onto the damp linen. Hiss. The sound is sudden and sharp, the sound of water turning instantly to steam. A cloud of white vapor rises from under the iron, smelling of wet flax and hot metal. It is a clean, laundry scent, domestic and purifying. She moves the iron slowly along the seam. She presses down with her shoulder weight, driving the heat and the steam into the fibers. The iron glides over the damp cloth. She lifts it. The steam dissipates. The seam is now perfectly flat. The 2 flaps of the seam allowance are pressed open, lying flush against the fabric. The ridge is gone. The join is smooth. She rotates the bodice. She sprays water. Flick, flick, she applies the iron. Hiss. She presses the side seams. She presses the shoulder seams. The linen bodice is now crisp and geometric. The heat has set the stitches, locking them into their final position. She sets the iron back on the stone trivet near the fire to reheat. She needs it to be hot for the velvet, but pressing velvet is a terrifying task. If she presses the iron directly onto the velvet, she will crush the pile. The beautiful, standing fibers will be flattened into a shiny, hard scar, ruining the fabric. She must use a needle board or a velvet board. She retrieves this from the cedar chest. It is a specialized tool, a piece of canvas studded with thousands of tiny, U-shaped wire staples. It looks like a bed of nails for a fairy. When the velvet is placed face down on this board, the pile sinks between the wires, protected from crushing, while the back can be pressed. She lays the needle board on the table. She takes the velvet bodice from the chair. She turns it inside out. She lays the side seam along the board. She takes a piece of damp muslin, a pressed cloth, and lays it over the seam. She cannot let the iron touch the velvet directly, even on the back. She retrieves the iron. It has regained its heat. She lowers it onto the pressed cloth. Hiss. The steam shoots down through the muslin, through the woven back of the velvet, and into the pile. She does not slide the iron this time. She presses straight down. Lift, move, press. She works with extreme caution. She lifts the press cloth to check. The seam allowance is flattened. She turns the bodice over to check the face. The pile is uncrushed. The velvet glows, refreshed by the steam. It looks seamless, as if the fabric grew that way. She repeats the process for every seam on the velvet bodice. Press, hiss, lift, check. The room fills with the humidity of the steam, softening the dry winter air. The windows fog up in the corners, blurring the view of the snow even further. When the pressing is done, she returns the heavy iron to the hearth. Her arm aches slightly from the weight. It is a good ache, a sign of effort spent. Now, the marriage of the fabrics. The velvet bodice and the linen lining must become one. She clears the pressing tools from the table. She lays the velvet bodice flat on the walnut surface, right side facing up. The cream fabric gleams in the candlelight, the curves of the bust and waist casting soft, inviting shadows. She takes the linen bodice. She turns it inside out so the raw seams are on the outside. She lays it on top of the velvet. Right sides together. The smooth face of the linen touches the plush face of the velvet. The raw seams of the linen face the ceiling. The raw seams of the velvet face the table. It looks like a mess of raw edges and wrong sides. She begins to pin. This requires precision. She must match the seams exactly. The side seam of the linen must sit directly on top of the side seam of the velvet. If they are misaligned, the dress will twist on the body. She finds the waist seam. She inserts a pin through the linen seam, through the velvet seam. She feels the thickness. She pins it. She moves to the underarm. She matches the seams. Pin. She moves to the shoulder, matches the seams, pin. She pins the entire perimeter of the neckline. The curve of the neck is gentle but unforgiving. She uses many pins, spacing them only half an inch apart. The heads of the pins form a dotted line of black glass beads along the edge of the fabric. She pins the armholes. She pins the center front edges. She leaves the bottom waist edge open. This is crucial. She needs an opening to turn the bodice right side out later. The bodice is now a sandwich of fabric, held together by a forest of pins. It is stiff and heavy. She sits down in the chair. She rethreads her needle with the strong, waxed silk thread. She needs the strength of silk for this join. She begins to sew the neckline. She uses a backstitch again, but smaller this time, tiny and tight. This seam will hold the weight of the gown. It will be under tension. Pierce, slide, pull. She sews through the linen and the velvet. The needle passes through the different densities. It pops through the linen, then glides through the velvet. Pop, slide, pop, slide. She follows the chalk line she marked hours ago, which is now barely visible under the pins. She removes the pins as she goes. Plink, plink, plink. The ceramic bowl fills with the discarded steel. She sews up the left center front. She sews around the neckline. She sews down the right center front. She turns corners with sharp 90-degree pivots, taking one diagonal stitch to reinforce the point. The work is slow, the layers are thick. Her thimble clicks against the needle with every stitch. Click, push, pull. The fire settles again. The beech log has burned down to a glowing skeleton. The heat is less intense now, a gentle, ambient warmth. The seamstress stops to adjust her shawl, pulling it tighter around her shoulders. She flexes her fingers, which are beginning to feel the strain of pushing through the multiple layers. She picks up the cup of water and takes a sip. It is cold now, but wet. She returns to the sewing. She must sew the armholes. This is awkward. She has to maneuver the bulk of the fabric through the small opening of the shoulder strap. She bunches the velvet in her hand, crushing it gently. It springs back, resilient. She stitches the circle of the left armhole, round and round. She stitches the circle of the right armhole, round and round. The sewing is done, but she cannot turn it yet. If she were to turn the bodice right side out now, the curved seams of the neckline and armholes would pucker and pull. The fabric needs room to spread. She picks up the shears. It is time for grading and clipping. First, she grades the seam allowance. She trims the linen layer down to 1/4 of an inch. Snip, snip, snip. The scissors glide through the linen. Then she trims the velvet layer but leaves it slightly longer, perhaps 3/8 of an inch. By cutting them to different lengths, she ensures that the seam allowance won't create a thick, bulky ridge when turned. It grades the thickness down gently like a set of stairs. Then she clips the curves. This is a move of high risk. She must cut perpendicular slits into the seam allowance, right up to the stitching line but not through it. If she cuts the thread, the seam will explode. If she doesn't cut close enough, the seam will pucker. She holds the neckline close to her eyes. She opens the blades of the shears. She uses only the very tips. Snip, she cuts a slit. It stops 1 millimeter from the silk thread. Snip, another slit 1/2 inch away. Snip, snip, snip. She works her way around the curve of the neck. The seam allowance now looks like a fringe. These little tabs of fabric will spread apart when the curve is turned inward, allowing the outer fabric to lie smooth. She repeats this for the armholes. Snip, snip, snip. The sound is tiny and precise, like a bird cracking seeds. The preparation is complete. The bodice is sewn, pressed, graded, and clipped. It looks like a rag, a confused jumble of inside-out fabric with raw edges and fraying linen. It is hard to believe this will be a garment of beauty. Now the turn. She reaches her hand inside the open waist of the bodice, between the linen and the velvet. She pushes her hand all the way up to the shoulder. She grabs the fabric at the top of the shoulder strap. She begins to pull. She pulls the shoulder through the narrow tunnel of the strap. It resists. The velvet grips the linen. She works it slowly, massaging the fabric, easing the bulk through the opening. Push, pull, ease. The shoulder pops through. Suddenly, there is a clean, finished edge of velvet and linen. She does the other shoulder. Push, pull, ease. She reaches into the corners of the center front neckline. She turns them out. They are blunt and rounded. She needs them sharp. She picks up a tool from the table, a point turner. It is a slender piece of polished bone, pointed at one end but not sharp enough to pierce the fabric. She inserts it into the bodice. She works the point into the corner. She pushes gently from the inside. The corner extends. It becomes a perfect right angle. The velvet corner is crisp. The linen lining sits just inside, invisible from the front. She runs the bone tool along the inside of the neckline seam, pressing the seam allowance open from within, smoothing out the curve. She runs it around the armholes. She lays the bodice down on the table. It has transformed. It is no longer a collection of parts. It is a vest. The raw edges are gone, hidden inside the sandwich of fabric. The lining is locked inside. The velvet is smooth and unbroken on the outside. The neckline is a perfect sweeping curve. The armholes are neat ovals. The cream velvet catches the light, glowing with a soft, buttery radiance. The linen lining peeks out only at the open waist, a hint of the clean, white interior. The seamstress runs her hands over the garment. She can feel the seams inside, but they are flat. She smooths the front. It lies perfectly flat on the table, thanks to the pressing, the grading, and the clipping. It is a triumph of engineering as much as art. She exhales, a long, deep breath that empties her lungs. She leans back in the chair, the wood creaking in sympathy. The tension drains from her neck. She looks at the window. The snow has piled even higher. It must be well past midnight now. The silence of the castle is absolute. There is not even the sound of a mouse in the wainscoting. The world is asleep, buried under feet of snow. But the work is not done. The bodice is only the top half. The skirt, the massive, heavy velvet skirt, waits in the bolt of fabric, and the sleeves, and the lacing. She stands slowly. She needs to stretch. She walks to the fire and picks up the iron poker. She stirs the coals, breaking the beech log apart to expose the last of its heat. She adds no new wood yet. She will let the fire die down to embers for a while to save the fuel. The room will cool, but the work will keep her warm. She returns to the table and looks at the turned bodice. It is a small victory in a long night. She picks up the iron, which is still warm, though not hot. She gives the edges of the bodice one last, gentle press, just to set the turn. Hiss, a quiet dying hiss. She hangs the finished bodice on the dress form. It looks like a torso now. It has substance. It has a front and a back and an inside. It waits there in the dim light, a headless queen in cream velvet, watching the seamstress as she prepares for the next task. The night has stretched into the small, silent hours, that deep valley of time between midnight and dawn, where the world seems to hang suspended in a state of frozen grace. The snow outside has ceased its frantic swirling, settling instead into a vertical, relentless descent, a curtain of heavy white flakes that buries the landscape inch by quiet inch. The window of the solar is now blocked entirely at the bottom by the drift, leaving only the upper panes to show the pale, diffuse gray of the winter sky. The keep is sealed. The room is a capsule. Inside, the fire has burned down to a bed of pulsing, dark red embers. The beech log has surrendered its form, crumbling into a glowing landscape of heat that radiates a steady, drowsy warmth. The seamstress, having finished the delicate, intricate work of the bodice, stands before the hearth for a moment. She does not hurry to replenish the flames. She merely stands, letting the heat seep through the wool of her skirts, warming her legs. She rubs her hands together, feeling the dryness of her skin, the calluses on her fingertips from the needle, the faint stiffness in her joints. The bodice, a hollow shell of cream velvet and white linen, sits on the dress form in the corner, a silent observer. It is done, but it is only the beginning. The bodice is the heart of the dress, but the skirt is its body, its presence, its weight. The skirt of a winter wedding dress must be massive. It must be a fortress of fabric, capable of sweeping over stone floors, of puddling around the bride's feet, of trailing behind her like a royal shadow. The walnut table, which served so well for the small pieces of the bodice, is now insufficient. It is an island too small for the ocean of velvet that is about to be unleashed. The seamstress turns to the room itself. She must use the floor. She moves the heavy wooden chairs, sliding them back against the stone walls. Scrape, thud, scrape, thud. The sound echoes dully in the quiet room. She moves the small side tables, stacking them carefully in the corner. She lifts the rush matting from the center of the room. The rushes, dried and brittle, whisper as they are disturbed, releasing a fresh burst of lavender and old dust. She rolls the matting up, creating a bundle of dried reeds that she stands against the door. Beneath the rushes, the floor is made of wide, polished oak planks. They are dark with age and beeswax, smooth and cool. She takes a broom made of bound birch twigs from the corner. She begins to sweep. A swish, 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 swish. The rhythm is slow and hypnotic. She sweeps the dust and the stray lint from the cutting of the bodice into a small pile. She moves methodically from the hearth toward the door, clearing a vast rectangular space in the center of the room. The floorboards gleam in the firelight, a dark, reflective pool waiting for the fabric. She sweeps the dust into a pan and discards it. She runs a cloth over the wood to ensure there are no splinters, no rough patches that could snag the precious velvet. The floor is pristine. Now she returns to the table to retrieve the bolt of fabric. It is still heavy, a massive cylinder of cream potential. She lifts it with both arms, grunting softly with the effort. She carries it to the center of the room and sets it down on the oak floor. Thud. She kneels. The wood is hard against her knees, but she does not mind. This is the posture of the tailor. She pushes the bolt. It rolls. Rumble. The sound of the heavy roll moving across the floorboards is deep and satisfying. A yard of velvet unrolls. 2 yards. 3 yards. She unrolls a vast expanse of the cream fabric, stretching it out until it nearly touches the hearth. It looks like a path of moonlit snow laid down inside the room. She crawls along the edge of the fabric, smoothing it out. Her hands sweep wide arcs, pushing the air out from beneath the cloth. The velvet ripples like water, then settles flat and heavy. The nap is thick. When she brushes it one way, it looks like milk, the other way like rich butter. She ensures the nap is running downwards toward the hem. This will make the skirt look lighter, more luminous in the candle glow. She retrieves her measuring tape, the long leather ribbon, and the chalk. She also fetches a yardstick, a long, straight piece of polished ash wood, exactly 3 feet long, marked with notches. The skirt will not be a simple rectangle gathered at the waist. That would be too bulky, too clumsy. It must be cut in gores, trapezoidal panels that are narrow at the waist and wide at the hem. This creates a silhouette that fits smoothly over the hips and flares dramatically at the floor. She starts with the front panel. It is the only panel that will be cut on the fold, creating a symmetrical triangle. She folds the velvet lengthwise, selvage to selvage. The heavy cloth resists, wanting to slide, but she wrestles it into submission. She aligns the edges perfectly. She places the river stone weights on the corners. She consults the parchment. The front length is 42 inches. The waist width is 12. The hem width is 40. She marks the top. She marks the bottom. She lays the ash yardstick down, connecting the marks diagonally. She draws the chalk line. Scritch. It is a long, continuous line cutting across the creamy expanse. She picks up the shears. She is kneeling on the floor, bending over the fabric. The mechanics of cutting are different here. She cannot use the table to support the shears. She must slide the lower blade along the floorboards, lifting the velvet slightly. Crunch, slide, crunch, slide. She crawls forward on her knees as she cuts. It is a slow quadrupedal dance. Cut, crawl, cut, crawl. The sound of the shears is magnified by the acoustics of the empty floor. The velvet falls away, leaving the triangular front panel isolated. She finishes the cut. She stands up, lifting the heavy panel, shakes it once to remove the chalk dust, flap, and lays it on the table. Now for the side panels and the back. These are not cut on the fold. They are cut singly. She unfolds the velvet bolt. She unrolls more fabric. The bolt is getting lighter, but the pile of cut fabric is growing. She needs 4 side gores and 2 back gores. The back gores must be longer to form the train. The train will trail 2 feet behind the bride. She measures the first side gore. It is a trapezoid. Narrow top, wide bottom. She marks it, but she does not cut it yet. To save fabric, she measures the next gore upside down, wide bottom at the top of the fabric, narrow top at the bottom. The 2 trapezoids nest together like puzzle pieces, minimizing waste. This is the economy of the trade. She marks a series of these shapes along the length of the velvet. It looks like a geometry problem drawn in white dust on a field of cream. She resumes the cutting position. Crunch, slide, crunch, slide. The repetition is endless. The line of the cut seems to stretch for miles. Her knees begin to ache. She pauses to shift her weight, sitting back on her heels, stretching her back. The firelight flickers, casting her shadow long and distorted against the wall. She looks like a giantess in the shadows, laboring over a landscape. She returns to the shears. The metal handles are warm from her grip. The blades are still sharp. She slices through the velvet. The sound is a rhythm that marks the passing of the night. It is a boring sound, a safe sound. She cuts the first side gore. She cuts the second. She cuts the third. She cuts the fourth. She stacks them on the table. The pile of velvet on the walnut surface is rising, a tower of cream. Now the train, the back panels. These are massive. They are 60 inches long, flaring out to a width of nearly 3 feet each at the hem. They consume yards of velvet. She unrolls the last significant portion of the bolt. The cardboard core of the roll is visible now, brown and humble. She measures the train. She draws the curve of the hem. It is not straight. It must be rounded so it glides over the floor. She uses a piece of string tied to the chalk to draw the perfect arc, pinning one end of the string to the waist mark and swinging the chalk like a pendulum. Swoosh. The white line curves gracefully across the fabric. She cuts, crunch, crunch, crunch. This is the longest cut of all. She moves slowly, ensuring the blade does not waver. The train is the focal point of the exit. It must be flawless. She finishes the cut. The back panels are free. The bolt is empty. Only the cardboard tube and a few scraps of velvet remain. The floor is covered in cabbage, snippets of thread, dust from the chalk, and irregular shapes of leftover fabric. She stands up. She groans softly, a sound of honest fatigue. Her knees are stiff. She walks a small circle around the room, shaking out her skirts, getting the blood flowing back into her legs. She goes to the fire. It is time to build it up again. The room is cooling rapidly without the insulation of the rug. She places 2 large peat blocks onto the embers. Peat burns differently than wood. It smolders with a dense aromatic smoke and a steady low heat. It does not flare or crackle much. It just glows. The scent of the peat, earthy, ancient, like dried bog, fills the room, mingling with the beeswax and the velvet. She returns to the floor. She cannot leave the skirt pieces in a pile. She must pin them together. The construction of the skirt requires gravity. She takes the front panel, the triangle, and lays it in the center of the floor, right side up. She takes a side gore. She lays it right side down on the front panel, matching the side edges. This is a seam that is over 40 inches long. It requires many pins. She gets down on her knees again. She places the pincushion on the floor beside her. She begins to pin. In, down, up, out. She moves along the length of the seam. She crawls, pin, crawl, pin, crawl. The velvet is heavy. It does not shift easily, which is a blessing. But the pile locks together, making it hard to adjust if she makes a mistake. She has to get it right the first time. She reaches the bottom. The first seam is pinned. She opens the panels like a book. Now she has a larger shape. She takes the next side gore. She pins it to the other side of the front panel. Pin, crawl, pin. The skirt is growing. It is spreading across the floor like a cream-colored oil slick. It is taking up the entire center of the solar. She has to be careful where she puts her knees so she doesn't crush the velvet. She moves around the perimeter of the garment, a servant to the cloth. She pins the back panels, the train. These are heavy. When she lifts them to align the edges, she feels the drag of the fabric. It is a substantial weight. The bride will need to be strong to wear this. Pin, crawl, pin. The sound of the pins entering the fabric is the only sound. Zip, zip, zip. Finally, the entire skirt is pinned together into one massive circular shape. It lies on the floor, a pool of velvet. The waist is a small circle in the center. The hem is a giant circumference at the edges. It is ready for basting. She cannot take this to the machine. There are no machines. She cannot hold this entire weight in her lap to hand sew it without basting it first. If she tried, the weight of the skirt would pull the seams apart as she sewed. She sits on the floor. She does not bother with the chair. The work is down here. She pulls the edge of the skirt onto her lap. She threads the large darning needle with the white cotton basting thread. A stitch, a stitch, a stitch. She begins the long trek of basting the vertical seams. There are 6 seams. Each is nearly 4 feet long. That is 24 feet of basting. She enters a trance. The needle dips and rises. The white thread trails behind it. She works her way up the first seam from hem to waist. She removes the pins as she goes, dropping them into the ceramic bowl which she has placed on the floor. Clink. She finishes one seam. She shifts the heavy mass of fabric. She starts the next. The fire glows red. The snow piles up against the glass. The silence is thick and cotton-heavy. The seamstress is an island in a sea of velvet. She works with a rhythmic, rocking motion. Pierce the fabric, rock back to pull the thread, rock forward to pierce again. It is a motion as old as clothing itself. Rock, stitch, rock, stitch. Time loses its meaning. There is no clock in the room, only the burning of the candles and the beating of her own heart. The candle wax drips. The peat blocks turn from brown to glowing orange. She finishes the third seam, halfway there. She stops to stretch her hands. The fingers of her right hand are cramped from gripping the needle. She shakes them out. She massages the web of muscle between her thumb and forefinger. She looks down at the skirt. In the dim light, the folds of the velvet look like the valleys of a snowy landscape. It is a dress made of winter itself. She resumes fourth seam, fifth seam. The train seams are the longest. She sews them with extra care, knowing they will drag across cathedral floors. Finally, the last stitch is taken. The last knot is tied. The last pin clinks into the bowl. The skirt is basted. It is a single, cohesive unit now. She stands up, her knees protesting loudly this time with a series of cracks. She grabs the waist of the skirt. She lifts. The velvet rises with her. It is heavy, heavy, heavy. It cascades from her hands, pooling on the floor, dragging its weight. She holds it up against her body, waist high. The hem brushes the floor. The train puddles behind her. She walks slowly toward the dress form in the corner. The skirt follows her, a whispering, heavy tale. The sound of the velvet dragging over the oak floor is a soft, continuous sh-ch-ch-ch-ch-ch. She approaches the bodice on the dummy. She cannot attach the skirt yet. It needs to be pleated to fit the waist, but she wants to see the scale. She drapes the skirt around the base of the stand, pinning the waist of the skirt loosely to the bottom of the bodice just to hold it up. She steps back. The silhouette is revealed. It is majestic. The fitted bodice flows into the massive, bell-shaped skirt. The cream velvet catches the firelight, creating deep shadows in the folds and bright highlights on the curves. It looks like a statue carved from butter. It looks warm. It looks impenetrable. The seamstress stares at it, her eyes heavy with sleep, but her spirit satisfied. The great cutting is done. The great assembly has begun. The room is cluttered with the debris of the work, the empty bolt, the broom, the tools scattered on the floor. But the dress stands rising from the chaos, serene and perfect. She leaves the dress form and walks to the window one last time in this hour. The snow has reached the second pane of glass. The world is being erased, but inside, something is being created. She turns back to the fire, picking up the poker to bank the peat for the next phase of the night. The hardest physical labor is over. Now the slow, rhythmic detail work will return. The pleating, the sewing, the finishing. But first, a moment of stillness. She sits in the chair, staring at the dress, listening to the silence of the snow, letting the image of the cream velvet burn into her mind as the firelight pulses gently in the dark. The hour of the wolf has arrived. It is that indistinct gray stretch of the night when the darkness is at its absolute deepest, heavy and impenetrable, yet vibrating with the silent promise of a dawn that is still hours away. The snow has continued its relentless siege of the stone keep. The window of the solar, which began the night as a portal to a view of the valley, is now a wall of white. The drifts have risen to cover the glass completely, sealing the room into a cocoon of stone and snow. The wind has died down entirely, leaving a silence so profound that it rings faintly in the ears, a high, thin frequency of nothingness. Inside the solar, the air has cooled. The stone walls, thick as they are, bleed the chill of the buried world into the room. But the hearth remains a bastion of heat. The blocks of peat, added in the previous hour, have settled into a steady, intense burn. They do not flame with the cheerful, flickering light of the wood. Instead, they glow with a brooding, dark orange luminosity, pulsing slowly like the breathing of a large, sleeping beast. The smoke they release is aromatic, smelling of ancient earth, compressed roots, and the damp, wild moors of summer. It hangs in the air near the ceiling rafters, a thin blue haze that softens the edges of the room. The seamstress sits on a low wooden stool she has pulled close to the fire. The high-backed chair is too formal, too removed from the work that now occupies her. The massive velvet skirt, basted but not yet permanently sewn, lies in a heap around her. It covers her lap, her legs, and spills onto the floor on all sides, a vast, cream-colored ocean of fabric. It serves as a blanket, trapping her body heat in the heat of the fire, keeping her warm in the cooling room. She has rethreaded her needle. She uses a thicker needle now, a size 6, capable of piercing the double layers of the heavy velvet without bending. The thread is the strongest silk in her arsenal buttonhole twist, thick and cord-like, heavily waxed until it is stiff and wiry. The task before her is one of endurance. She must permanently sew the 6 vertical seams of the skirt. She has already basted them with white cotton, but basting is merely a suggestion. The permanent stitch must be in order. She picks up the first seam, finding the hem in the mass of fabric. She positions the velvet over her finger. The weight of the skirt pulls at her hand, a constant, heavy drag. She anchors the fabric under her arm to support the weight. Pierce, push, pull. She begins the backstitch again, but on the skirt the scale is different. The stitches are slightly longer, perhaps 1/6 of an inch, to accommodate the thickness of the pile. The sound is different too. It is a muffled thumpzip as the needle passes through the expansive yardage. Thumpzip tug, thumpzip tug. She works her way up the first seam. It is 5 feet of sewing. The landscape of the velvet moves slowly across her lap. As she sews, she removes the white basting threads, pulling them out with a sharp snap and dropping them onto the floor. The seam transforms from a loose, tentative join into a solid, structural line. The cream velvet merges, the pile interlocking so perfectly that the seam becomes almost invisible, revealed only by the slight depression in the fabric. The monotony is absolute. There is no variation in the terrain. It is yard after yard of cream velvet. The fire glows. The candle flickers. The needle flashes. Thumpzip tug. She finishes the first seam. She rotates the massive skirt. The fabric rustles heavily, a sound like a grand curtain falling at the end of a play. She finds the second seam. She begins again. Her mind empties. This is the trance of the artisan. She does not think of the cold. She does not think of the time. She thinks only of the tension of the thread. Is it too tight? No. Is it too loose? No, it is perfect. She reaches the third seam. The pile of finished skirt on her left grows. The pile of unsewn skirt on her right diminishes. She is processing the garment inch by inch. Occasionally she stops to wax the thread. She runs the silk through the cake of beeswax. ZZZZT, ZZZZT. The smell of the honey rises, sweet and cloying, mixing with the peat smoke. It is a sensory lullaby. She threads the needle. She knots the end. She resumes. The 4th seam, the 5th seam, the 6th seam. The final stitch is placed at the waistline of the last panel. She ties off the thread with a triple knot, burying the end deep inside the seam allowance so it will never scratch the bride. She cuts the thread. Snip. She exhales, leaning back on the low stool. Her back creaks. Her fingers are sore, the skin indented with the pattern of the thimble and the eye of the needle. But the skirt is whole. It is a single, continuous bell of velvet. She stands, shedding the heavy blanket of the skirt. It slides to the floor, pooling around the stool. She steps out of the circle of fabric. She walks to the ceramic bowl and dips her hands in the water. It is cold now, shocking her warm skin. She rubs her fingers, cleansing them of the wax residue and the velvet lint. She dries them on her apron. She tends the candles. They are nearly gone. The stumps of wax are drowning in the pools of their own making. She takes fresh candles from a wooden box on the mantel. They are tall, pale, and pristine. She lights the new candles from the dying flames of the old ones, transferring the fire before snuffing out the stubs. The room brightens significantly as the fresh wicks catch, casting taller, sharper shadows. Now she must tackle the waist. The skirt is currently a massive tube, over 4 yards in circumference at the top. The bride's waist is tiny, barely 24 inches. To fit the massive amount of fabric into the small waistband, the seamstress cannot simply bunch it up. It would be bulky and ugly. She must use cartridge pleating, or gauging. This is a historical technique used for heavy fabrics like velvet. It allows a huge volume of cloth to be attached to a waistband without adding thickness to the seam. She sits back down on the stool. She pulls the waist edge of the skirt onto her lap. First, she must fold over the top edge of the velvet to create a clean header. She folds it down by 2 inches. She bastes this fold in place with large white stitches. Baste, baste, baste. Now the marking. Cartridge pleating requires mathematical precision. If the pleats are uneven, the skirt will hang crookedly. She takes her measuring tape and the chalk. She marks the inside of the waistband. She makes a small vertical dash every ½ inch. Dash, dash, dash. She moves along the entire 4-yard circumference of the waist. It takes a long time. There are nearly 300 marks to make. Dash, dash, dash. The repetition is hypnotic. The white chalk marks look like a picket fence stretching across the cream velvet. When the marking is done, she prepares the thread. For cartridge pleating, the thread must be incredibly strong. It will bear the weight of the entire skirt. She uses the heavy buttonhole twist again, but this time she uses a double strand. She waxes it heavily. She threads the needle. She ties a massive knot at the end. She begins the first row of stitching. She inserts the needle at the first chalk mark. She takes a stitch exactly 1/4 of an inch long. She pulls the thread through. She moves to the next mark. Another stitch. In at the mark, out between the marks, in at the mark. She is creating a running stitch, but it is precise. The stitches must be perfectly parallel to the edge of the fabric. She works her way around the entire waist. Stitch, stitch, stitch. She does not pull the thread tight yet. She leaves the fabric flat. The thread lies on the surface, a dotted line of cream silk. When she completes the first circle, she leaves a long tail of thread hanging loose. She does not knot it off. She threads the needle again with a fresh double strand. She begins a second row of stitching, exactly 1/4 of an inch below the first row. Crucially, she must match the stitches exactly. The needle must go in at the same vertical point as the stitch above, and come out at the same point. The 2 rows of stitches must be identical twins. In below, out below, in below. This requires intense focus. If the stitches are not aligned, the pleats will twist. The seamstress narrows her eyes, bringing the work close to the candlelight. The velvet pile makes it hard to see, so she feels the stitch with her thumb. Pierce, slide, pull. She works her way around the 4 yards of waist again. The fire pops. The snow presses. The silence hums. She is sewing a grid into the velvet. She finishes the second row. She leaves a long tail of thread hanging next to the first one. Now the transformation. This is the moment where the fabric becomes architecture. She stands up. She anchors the waist of the skirt to the heavy table leg using a clamp, holding the left end of the fabric firm. She holds the two long tails of the gathering threads in her right hand. She begins to pull. She pulls the threads gently. The velvet begins to slide along the silk tracks. It ripples. It gathers. Slide, bunch, slide. The flat fabric transforms into a series of uniform, rounded folds. They look like a row of cartridges in a belt, or the pipes of a tiny organ. Because the stitches are perfectly aligned, the velvet folds precisely in half between the stitch points, creating a thick, rounded pleat that stands perpendicular to the waistband. She pulls more. The massive 4-yard circumference begins to shrink. The velvet condenses. The pleats pack together tightly, side by side, dense and heavy. Slide, pack. The sound of the velvet rubbing against itself is a soft, friction-heavy shhhhh crunch. It is a sound of luxury and density. She works the gathers along the entire length of the skirt. She evens them out with her fingers, stroking the pleats to make sure they are standing up straight. They look like the gills of a mushroom, perfectly spaced, creamy and soft. She pulls until the waist of the skirt matches the measurement of the bodice waist. The 4 yards of fabric have been compressed into 24 inches of dense, beautiful pleats. The header of the skirt is now 2 inches thick with folded velvet. It is a solid ring of fabric. She ties the gathering threads together temporarily to hold the tension. She runs her hand along the top of the pleats. They feel like a corrugated shell, hard and structured, yet soft to the touch. It is a miracle of sewing physics. She releases the skirt from the table clamp. She lifts it. It is different now. It is no longer a flowing sheet. It is a garment with a distinct shape. The pleats at the waist force the skirt to flare out immediately, creating a bell shape that will support itself without a hoop. She carries the skirt to the dress form. The bodice is waiting there. She kneels at the base of the dummy. She lifts the heavy ring of pleated velvet. She holds it up to the waist of the bodice. She cannot attach it yet. That is a task for fresh eyes and daylight. But she can test the look. She uses a few large pins to tack the pleated skirt to the bottom of the canvas dummy, just below the bodice. She steps back. The effect is immediate. The dress is sudden and overwhelming. The slim, fitted bodice sits atop the exploding volume of the skirt. The cartridge pleats at the waist create a shelf of velvet, making the waist look impossibly small. The skirt falls in deep, columnar folds, heavy and rich, pooling on the floor in a massive train. The cream color is consistent, a monolith of pale light in the dark room. The firelight catches the tops of the cartridge pleats, making them look like a string of pearls wrapped around the waist. The shadows in the deep folds of the skirt are almost black. The seamstress walks around the form. Crunch, crunch. The rushes on the floor are the only sound. She checks the hang of the train. It sweeps out behind the dummy, a river of cream. It is perfect. She yawns, a deep, jaw-cracking yawn that brings tears to her eyes. The night is old. The adrenaline of the pleating is fading, replaced by a heavy, leaden fatigue. Her shoulders ache from the weight of the fabric. Her eyes burn from the strain of the candlelight. She walks to the window. She places her hand against the glass. It is freezing. She can see nothing now, only the white wall of snow pressed tight against the pane. They are truly buried. The world has ended and only this room remains. She turns back to the fire. The peat blocks are still glowing, but they are covered in a fine layer of gray ash. She takes the iron poker and gently breaks the ash surface, exposing the red heart of the heat. She adds one more block of peat. It settles with a soft thump. She picks up the stool and moves it back to the corner. She tidies the table, placing the chalk, the scissors, and the wax back in their designated spots. She coils the measuring tape. She sweeps the snipped threads from the floor into the fire. She looks at the dress one last time. It stands in the corner, a ghostly queen. It is nearly a dress. It lacks sleeves. It lacks the permanent join of the waist. It lacks the lining of the skirt. But the silhouette is complete. She pulls her shawl tighter around herself. She sits in the high-backed chair just for a moment to rest her eyes before the next phase. The silence wraps around her like another layer of wool. The rhythm of the night continues, marked only by the slow burning of the peat and the beating of her own heart. The winter holds the castle in its palm, and the dress waits. The night has entered its deepest phase, a time known in the old watches as the dead of night. It is a time when the connection between the earth and the sky seems severed by the heavy curtain of the storm. The snow has not ceased. Rather, it has become a permanent condition of existence. It piles against the stone walls of the keep, a silent, rising tide that muffles the world. The silence in the solar is no longer just a lack of noise. It is a physical pressure, a heavy blanket of quiet that presses against the eardrums. The seamstress sits in the high-backed chair, her body angled toward the hearth. The peat fire has settled into a somber, steady rhythm. The blocks of turf burn with a stubborn, slow heat, glowing like ingots of dark iron in the gloom. The smoke, thick and aromatic, drifts lazily toward the chimney, carrying the scent of ancient earth and damp roots. It is a scent that grounds the soul, a reminder of the land sleeping beneath the frost. She rests for a moment, her hands lying open in her lap. Her fingers are stained faintly with the white dust of the tailor's chalk and the microscopic lint of the cream velvet. They throb with a dull, rhythmic ache, the ghost of the needle's pressure. She flexes them slowly, open, close, watching the tendons move beneath the skin. She is tired, a deep, bone-weary fatigue that feels heavy and warm, like a woolen cloak draped over her shoulders. But the dress is not done. The bodice stands on the form, the skirt is pleated, but the arms are bare. She stands, her joints cracking softly in the stillness. She moves to the table. It is time for the sleeves. A winter wedding requires sleeves. They must be long, reaching past the wrist to the knuckles to protect the hands from the draft of the cathedral. They must be tight, fitting the arm like a second skin, to allow the bride to wear a fur-lined cloak over them without bunching. She retrieves the last substantial piece of velvet from the remnants of the bolt. It is an irregular shape, a peninsula of cream fabric left over from the cutting of the great train. She spreads it out on the walnut table, smoothing the nap with the flat of her hand. Swish, swish. The pile is still resilient, springing back under her touch. She takes the chalk. She marks the sleeve pattern. A sleeve is a deceptive shape. It looks simple when worn, but flat. It is a complex piece of geometry. The cap of the sleeve, the part that fits into the shoulder, is an S-shaped curve, rising high to cover the shoulder point and scooping low to fit under the arm. The sides taper sharply down to the wrist. She draws the first sleeve. She measures the bicep. She measures the elbow. She measures the wrist. The wrist measurement is tiny, barely 6 inches around. The velvet will have to be buttoned tight to fit over the hand. She checks the nap. It must run down the arm so the light slides off it. She marks the second sleeve, mirroring the first. She nests them together on the fabric to minimize waste. She picks up the shears. Crunch, slide, crunch, slide. The sound is familiar now, a comforting, destructive rhythm. The shears navigate the S-curve of the sleeve cap. She turns the fabric, not the scissors, the cream velvet parts. She cuts the long, straight lines of the underarm seam. She cuts the wrist. 2 sleeves. They lie on the table, looking like disjointed limbs. Now the lining. Sleeves must be lined with linen to allow the arm to slide in easily. Velvet against skin would drag and stick. She retrieves the white linen remnants. She lays the velvet sleeves on top of the linen, using them as templates. Snip, rip, snip. The linen is cut, 2 white ghosts of the velvet sleeves. She sits down to assemble. She places the linen on the velvet, right sides together. She pins the wrist edge. She sews it with a small, tight backstitch. Pierce, slide, pull. This is the hem of the sleeve. By sewing it now inside out, she ensures a clean finish at the wrist. She turns the sleeves right side out. She presses the wrist seam with the iron, using the holder cloth to protect the velvet. Hiss. The steam rises. The edge becomes crisp. Now she has 2 flat sleeves, lined and hemmed at the wrist. But they are not yet tubes. She must close the underarm seam. However, because the wrist is so tight, she cannot simply sew the seam shut. The bride's hand would never pass through. There must be an opening. There must be buttons. A long row of tiny buttons running from the wrist halfway up the forearm. This is the tedious, beautiful work of the finisher. She needs buttons. She does not have a jar of matching cream buttons. She must make them. She pulls the basket of cabbage, the velvet scraps toward her. She searches for the small, unusable snippets. She finds a handful of triangular scraps. She takes a small, circular punch made of sharpened steel. She places a scrap of velvet on a block of lead. She places the punch on the velvet. She strikes it with a wooden mallet. Thud. She lifts the punch. A perfect circle of cream velvet, the size of a coin, is left on the lead block. She repeats this. Thud, another circle, thud, another. She needs 12 buttons for each arm, 24 buttons in total. She strikes the mallet 24 times. Thud, thud, thud. The sound is dull and heavy, echoing slightly in the stone room. Now she has 24 velvet circles. She needs the cores. She opens a small wooden box and takes out 24 wooden beads, small and round, made of turned holly wood. She threads a fine needle with strong thread. She picks up a velvet circle. She sews a running stitch around the very edge of the circle. In, out, in, out. She leaves the thread loose. She places a wooden bead in the center of the velvet circle, on the wrong side. She pulls the thread. The velvet curls up around the bead. It cinches tight, enclosing the wood. The raw edges of the fabric are gathered into the center, hidden. She pulls it tight, locking the velvet over the bead. She takes a few stitches across the gathered back to secure it. She holds it up. It is a perfect cream velvet berry, soft, round, and firm. She drops it into the ceramic bowl. Plink. She picks up the next circle. Stitch, 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 place bead, pull, secure, plink. The process is endless. It is a factory of one. The fire crackles softly. The wind moans outside, a low, distant bass note. The seamstress sits in the circle of candlelight, making tiny velvet worlds. Stitch, pull, secure, plink, stitch, pull, secure, plink. Her mind drifts. She thinks of the snow covering the forest. She thinks of the deer bedding down in the thickets, waiting for the dawn. She thinks of the river, frozen solid under the ice. Everything is waiting. Everything is still. She finishes the 12th button, one sleeve's worth. She stretches her neck, rolling her head from side to side. Her neck cracks. She continues. The 13th button, the 14th. The pile of cream berries in the bowl grows. They look delicious, like confectionery made of silk and light. When the 24th button clinks into the bowl, she sets the needle down. She is not done. Buttons need buttonholes. She takes the left sleeve. She marks the position of the buttons on the forearm seam. 12 marks, spaced 1 inch apart. On the opposite side of the seam, she must make the loops. She does not cut buttonholes into the velvet. It would fray too easily. Instead, she makes thread loops. This is a delicate art. She anchors her thread at the edge of the seam. She creates a loop of thread, arching it over the imaginary button. She anchors it back into the fabric. She does this 3 times, creating a bridge of 3 strands of silk. Now she covers the bridge. She uses a buttonhole stitch, a knotted loop stitch to cover the strands of thread. Loop, not pull, loop, not pull. She works her way across the tiny arch of thread. The knots stack up next to each other, forming a solid, ridge-like covering over the silk strands. It looks like a tiny rope. It is strong and flexible. She finishes the first loop. It stands up from the edge of the velvet, a small, perfect arch waiting for its button. She moves down an inch. She starts the second loop. Bridge, 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 loop, not pull. The repetition is microscopic. Her eyes are focused on a space no larger than a grain of rice. The rest of the room blurs into darkness. There is only the needle, the silk, and the loop. She makes 12 loops on the left sleeve. She makes 12 loops on the right sleeve. The night deepens. The candle is burning low again. She pauses to trim the wick. Snip. The flame jumps, then settles. Now she sews the buttons on. She takes the right sleeve. She aligns the buttons with the loops. She sews each velvet berry onto the edge of the seam. Stitch, stitch, lock. She tests the first one. She pushes the velvet button through the thread loop. It is a tight fit. It pops through with a satisfying resistance. It holds securely. She sews the remaining buttons. Now she can close the rest of the sleeve seam. She sews from the top of the button placket up to the underarm and down the other side. She uses the heavy backstitch, thump zip, tug. She does this for both sleeves. She turns them right side out. They are long, slender tubes of cream velvet. The row of buttons at the wrist adds a detail of intricate texture. They look like the arms of a statue. She stands up. She walks to the dress form. The sleeveless dress waits. She pins the sleeves onto the form just to see. She pins the shoulder cap to the shoulder of the bodice. The sleeve hangs down, long and elegant. The wrist opens slightly where the buttons are unfastened. The dress is becoming complete. The silhouette is now cruciform, the long vertical of the skirt, the horizontal of the outstretched sleeves. It occupies the room with a silent, heavy presence. The seamstress feels a chill. The fire has burned low again. The peat blocks have turned to gray ash with a red core. She shivers. She walks to the chest and pulls out a fur pelt, a sheepskin, soft and tanned. She drapes it over the back of her chair. She checks the water pitcher. It is empty. She is thirsty, but she does not want to break the spell of the room to go to the kitchen. She finds a small flask of water on the side table left from earlier in the day. She drinks. The water is room temperature, tasting of stone and silence. She looks at the window. It is still a wall of white. The snow has not stopped. It may never stop. She returns to the chair and sits on the sheepskin. The fur is warm against her back. She picks up the sleeves she just pinned and unpins them. She cannot set them properly tonight. Setting a sleeve, sewing it into the armhole, is the hardest task in tailoring. It requires fresh eyes and daylight. If a sleeve is set wrong, it twists, it pulls, it ruins the line. She lays the finished sleeves on the table, side by side. They look like a pair of gloves for a giant. She cleans her workspace. She puts the remaining buttons in a small pouch. She sweeps the velvet dust from the table. She aligns her tools. The work of the night is winding down. The major components are built: the bodice, the skirt, the sleeves. Now remains the assembly, the lining of the skirt, and the finishing. She leans back in the chair, pulling her legs up, wrapping the shawl tight. She watches the fire. She watches the way the red glow breathes in the darkness. Inhale, exhale. The room breathes with it. The buttons are done, the loops are done, the velvet is cut, the silence is perfect. The night has worn on, grinding slowly toward the dawn like a heavy millstone turning in a frozen river. The hour is indeterminate, lost somewhere in the deep, colorless stretch between the death of the moon and the birth of the sun. The snow, which had been a frantic, swirling presence earlier in the evening, has now settled into a vertical, silent curtain. It falls with a heavy, wet purpose, burying the stone sill of the solar window completely, pressing a wall of white silence against the glass. The world outside is gone. There is no horizon, no sky, no ground. There is only the keep, suspended in a void of falling ice. Inside the solar, the atmosphere has thickened. The air is still and warm, layered with the sense of the night's labor, the metallic tang of the hot iron, the sweet cloying aroma of the beeswax, the dusty smell of the linen, and the rich, animal warmth of the velvet. The fire in the hearth has burned down to a slumbering bed of peat ash, a mound of gray powder that hides a core of intense, pulsing red heat. It does not flicker. It glows, breathing slowly with the draft of the chimney, a steady, rhythmic radiance that barely reaches the corners of the room. The seamstress moves with the economy of exhaustion. Her movements are slower now, stripped of any unnecessary flourish. She is a machine of habit, driven by the muscle memory of her hands. She stands at the walnut table, which has been cleared once again to receive the next stage of the work. The bodice, finished and lined, sits on the dress form. The skirt, a massive bell of pleated velvet, lies in a heap on the floor. The sleeves, finished but unattached, lie on the side table like resting artifacts. But the skirt is not finished. A velvet skirt, heavy and plush, cannot exist on its own. It would cling to the bride's legs, it would catch on the stone floors, it would twist and drag. It requires a lining. It needs a slippery, cool inner layer to allow the velvet to float. She walks to the cedar chest. She lifts the lid. Creak. The scent of cedar wood puffs out, sharp and clearing to the senses. She reaches deep into the bottom, past the woolens and the furs, and retrieves a bolt of glazed linen. This is not the soft, washed linen used for the bodice lining. This is a different beast. It is linen that has been treated with starch and polished with heavy stones until one side shines with a hard, glossy sheen. It is stiff. It rustles loudly when moved. It is cool to the touch, almost like parchment paper. It is the structural skeleton that will hold the velvet skirt open. She carries the bolt to the center of the room. She must repeat the floor work. The table is too small for the long gores of the skirt. She clears the floor of the velvet skirt, draping it carefully over the high-backed chair. The velvet slides heavily, pooling on the seat. The floorboards are bare again. She kneels, crack. Her knees protest the hard wood, a dull ache that is familiar and ignored. She unrolls the glazed linen. Crackle, swish. The sound is distinct. Unlike the muffled rumble of the velvet, the glazed linen makes a crisp, paper-like noise. It resists unrolling. It wants to curl back up. She has to smooth it down firmly with her palms, pressing the starch flat against the oak planks. She does not need to measure from scratch this time. She can use the velvet remnants, the cabbage, or simply the measurements she memorized. She needs the same panels, 1 front, 4 sides, 2 back. She marks the linen with the chalk. The chalk drags on the polished surface, leaving a faint, dusty line. She picks up the shears. Snip, slide, zip. The cutting is faster. The glazed linen offers no resistance to the blades. The shears fly through it. Zip, zip, zip. The sound is sharp and staccato, cutting through the silence of the room. She cuts the front panel. She cuts the side gores. She cuts the massive back train. The linen pieces scatter on the floor, white and ghostly, stiff shapes that hold their form even when lifted. She gathers them up. She sits on the low stool by the fire. She must sew the lining together, just as she did the velvet. She uses a waxed linen thread. She does not use the backstitch here. She uses a running stitch. Speed is permissible for the lining, provided it is strong. Dip up, dip up. The needle pops through the stiff fabric. Pop, pop, pop. It is a percussive sound. She sews the long vertical seams. The glazed linen is slippery. She has to pin it frequently to keep the edges aligned. Pin, stitch, remove pin, clank. She works her way through the yards of seams. The linen skirt takes shape. It is lighter than the velvet, but stiff. When she finishes the last seam, she stands it up on the floor. It almost stands by itself, a cone of white, starched fabric. Now the marriage of the two skirts. This is the bagging of the hem. The hem of the wedding dress will not be a simple fold. A folded velvet hem is thick and ugly. Instead, the lining will be sewn to the velvet at the bottom, right sides together, and then turned inside out. This creates a clean finish where the velvet simply curves under, and the lining begins on the inside, slightly higher than the floor. She lays the velvet skirt on the floor, spreading it out in a massive circle, right side up. The cream pile glows in the firelight. She takes the linen skirt. She turns it inside out. She lays it on top of the velvet skirt. Now she has a sandwich. Velvet on the bottom face up, linen on top face down. The raw edges of the hem are aligned. She begins to pin. This is a journey around the circumference of the world. The hem is over 10 yards long, curving around the train. She crawls on her knees. Align, pin, move, align, pin. She places a pin every 3 inches. The linen tries to slide away from the velvet. The velvet tries to creep. She forces them together. Pin, pin, pin. She crawls past the front panel. She crawls past the side panels. She reaches the train. The curve is deep here. She pins carefully, easing the two fabrics together. When the entire perimeter is pinned, she threads her needle with the strong silk. She sits on the floor, pulling the hem onto her lap. She sews the hem. She uses a half backstitch strong but with a little give. Stitch, pull. It takes an hour. The fire settles lower. The room grows cooler. She stops once to wrap the sheepskin from the chair around her shoulders. She looks like a shepherdess tending a flock of cream velvet. Stitch, pull. She finishes the circuit. She ties the knot. Now the turn. She reaches inside the tube of skirts. She grabs the waist of the velvet and the waist of the linen. She pulls. The entire garment turns right side out. She stands up and shakes the skirt. Whump. The lining falls inside the velvet. The raw edges of the hem disappear, trapped inside. The bottom edge of the skirt is now a perfect, rounded fold of velvet. The stiff linen lining supports the velvet, holding it out, giving it body. She smooths the skirt down. The linen is slightly shorter than the velvet, which pulls the velvet up on the inside by an inch. This ensures that the white lining will never peek out from under the dress. It is a jump hem. It is perfect. The skirt is now one heavy, lined composite unit. It weighs nearly 15 pounds. Now comes the most physically demanding task of the night, attaching the skirt to the bodice. She lifts the heavy skirt. She carries it to the dress form where the bodice waits. She needs to sew the pleated cartridges of the skirt waist to the bottom edge of the bodice. This must be done by hand, with extreme strength. She pins the skirt to the bodice again, checking the alignment. The center front of the skirt must match the center front of the bodice perfectly. The side seams must align. The center back must align. The weight of the skirt drags down, pulling the pins. She has to support the skirt on the stool, propping it up so it doesn't tear the bodice fabric. She threads the heaviest needle she has, a carpet needle with the double-waxed buttonhole twist. She sits on the chair, pulling the dress form close to her. She tilts the mannequin so the waist is at eye level. She begins at the center back. She inserts the needle through the lining of the bodice, through the velvet of the bodice, and into the top of the first cartridge pleat of the skirt. Push. It requires force. The needle goes through 6 layers of fabric and the dense pleat. She uses the thimble, pushing with the full strength of her arm. Push, grunt, pull. The thread pulls tight. The pleat locks against the bodice. She moves to the next pleat. Push, pull. She is sewing stitch in the ditch. She hides the stitches in the deep valleys between the pleats, so they are invisible from the outside. Push, pull, push, pull. The work is slow and grueling. Her fingers ache. The wax on the thread flakes off, dusting her apron with tiny white specks. She works her way around the waist. Pleat by pleat, inch by inch. The fire pops, a loud crack that signals the collapse of the peat ash. A small flame flickers up, casting a sudden, bright light on the work. She sees the dust motes dancing in the air. She sees the tension in the thread. She reaches the side seam. She has to rotate the dress form. The heavy skirt drags on the floor, scrape, swish. She heaves it around. She continues across the front. The waist of the bride is small, but the circumference of the sewing feels endless because of the density of the pleats. Push, pull. She checks the inside. The join must be clean. The raw edges of the skirt waist are hidden inside the pleats. The raw edge of the bodice is turned under. It is a clean finish. She reaches the final section, the last few inches of the back. Her hand is cramping. She stops. She shakes her hand out. She dips her fingers in the cold water bowl. The water is freezing now. It numbs the pain. She dries her hands. She picks up the needle. Push, pull. The last stitch is taken. She anchors the thread with a complex series of knots buried deep in the velvet pile. She cuts the thread. She drops the needle into the bowl. Clink. She stands up. She steps back. The dress is now one. It hangs on the form, a monumental column of cream velvet. The bodice flows seamlessly into the skirt. The cartridge pleats at the waist stand out like a sculpted frieze, holding the skirt out in a perfect bell shape. The bagged hem sits heavily on the floor, the train puddling in deep, luxurious folds. It is a fortress of warmth. It is a garment designed to defy the winter. The seamstress walks around it slowly. She checks the hang. The weight of the lining and the hem weight she inserted small lead coins sewn into the hem allowance make the skirt hang straight and true. It does not swing wildly. It moves with a stately, hydraulic grace. She touches the velvet. It is warm from her handling. The night is nearly over. She can feel the shift in the air that precedes the dawn. The heavy, dead feeling of the 3:00 a.m. hour has lifted, replaced by the thinner, sharper chill of 5:00 a.m. The silence outside has changed. The wind has picked up again, but it is a morning wind, brisk and moving, not the stagnant, heavy air of the storm. She walks to the window. She scrapes a small circle of frost from the upper pane with her fingernail. Scrape, scrape. She peers out. It is still dark, but the darkness has a blue quality to it now. The black is fading to indigo. The snow is still falling, but lighter. The storm is breaking. She turns back to the room. The fire is almost dead. She does not rebuild it. The work is almost done. The heat of the night is stored in the stones of the keep and in the heavy folds of the dress. She needs to clean the floor. The scraps of glazed linen, the snippets of thread, the chalk dust. She takes the birch broom. A swish, 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 swish. She sweeps the debris into the fire. The linen scraps flare up quickly, bright yellow flames that dance for a second and then vanish. She tidies the table. She places the sleeves next to the pincushion. They are the final piece of the puzzle. They wait to be set. She looks at the dress form again. In the dying light of the fire, the dress looks like a ghost. It is headless and armless, but it has a powerful presence. It occupies the room. It is the culmination of the sheep, the flax, the weaver, the dyer, and the long, snowy night of the seamstress. She sits in the high-backed chair. She does not sleep. She waits. She waits for the light to be strong enough to set the sleeves. Setting sleeves requires the truth of daylight. Candlelight lies about shadows. Daylight tells the truth. She pulls the sheepskin up to her chin. She closes her eyes, listening to the wind, listening to the house settling, listening to the silence of the dress. The winter is outside. The wedding is coming. The dress is ready to be finished. The transition from night to morning in the high stone keep is not a sudden event, but a slow, gray dilution of the darkness. The deep, impenetrable indigo of the storm-laden night begins to fade, bleeding out into a pale, bruised slate color that presses against the frosted glass of the solar window. The snow has finally ceased. The silence outside is no longer the silence of falling flakes, but the hard, crystallized silence of a frozen world. The drifts have piled high, reaching nearly to the center of the window pane, a sloping bank of white that reflects the coming dawn with a ghostly, cold luminescence. Inside the room, the fire has died. The hearth is a landscape of gray ash, cool and powdery, with only the faintest dying heat radiating from the stone back of the chimney. The air in the solar is cold now, crisp and biting. It smells of the extinguished smoke, the settled dust of the velvet, and the sharp, metallic scent of the dawn. The seamstress stirs in the high-backed chair. She has not slept, merely rested in a state of suspended animation, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow, conserving her warmth and her energy. She opens her eyes. The room is dim, filled with shadows that are no longer dancing with the firelight, but standing still in the gray morning light. She stands, her body is stiff. The cold has settled into her joints. She pulls the sheepskin wrap tighter around her shoulders, hugging the warmth to her chest. She walks to the window and breathes on the glass. The frost melts in a small circle, revealing the world outside. It is a landscape of absolute white. The valley, the river, the forest, all erased, smoothed over by the blanket of winter. The sky is a flat, featureless sheet of pearl gray. She turns back to the room. The light is sufficient now. It is the honest, flat light of early morning, devoid of the romance of the candle. It reveals every flaw, every pucker, every stray thread. It is the light of judgment. The dress form stands in the corner. The bodice and skirt are one. The sleeves lie on the table. It is time for the final union, the setting of the sleeves. She moves the dress form to the center of the room, into the pool of gray light falling from the upper window panes. The cream velvet looks different now. In the firelight, it was golden and buttery. In the daylight, it is the color of old ivory, cooler, more stately. It absorbs the shadows, looking dense and rich. She takes the left sleeve from the table. She holds it up. It is a long, curved tube of velvet, heavy with the lining and the buttons at the wrist. She turns the bodice of the dress inside out at the shoulder, exposing the armhole. She keeps the sleeve right side out. She drops the sleeve inside the bodice, so the raw edges of the shoulder cap meet the raw edges of the armhole, right sides together. She begins to pin. This is the moment of greatest tension. The sleeve cap, the curved top of the sleeve, is deliberately cut larger than the armhole. It has ease. This extra fabric allows the arm to move, to reach, to embrace. But it must be fitted into the smaller hole without creating a single pucker or pleat. It must be eased in, molded by the fingers and the pins until it fits perfectly smooth. She pins the underarm first. In, down, up, out. She pins the shoulder point. In, down, up, out. Now the easing. She holds the fabric in her hands. She gently pushes the velvet of the sleeve cap, compressing the fibers, forcing them to occupy less space without folding. It requires a tactile understanding of the cloth. She massages the velvet. Push. Smooth. Pin. She places a pin every quarter of an inch. The line of pins looks like a silver spine running around the shoulder. Push, smooth, pin. She works her way around the curve. She checks the outside. Is there a pucker? No. The velvet rolls over the shoulder smoothly, like water flowing over a stone. She repeats the process for the right sleeve. Drop, align, pin, ease. The silence of the room is broken only by the microscopic sounds of her work. The clink of a pin, the rustle of the lining, the creak of the floorboard as she shifts her weight. She sits on the stool to sew. She threads the needle with the strongest waxed silk. She uses the backstitch. Pierce, slide, pull. She sews the armhole seam. This is a circular seam, awkward and tight. She has to maneuver the entire bulk of the heavy dress to keep the needle moving freely. She drapes the skirt over her knees. It is heavy, a crushing weight of velvet, but it keeps her warm. A stitch, a stitch, a stitch. She sews around the left shoulder. She sews around the right shoulder. She double stitches the underarm area where the strain will be greatest. She removes the pins. Plink, plink, plink. The ceramic bowl is nearly full of the little steel soldiers that have held the dress together through the night. She stands. She reaches inside the dress and pulls the sleeves out. She turns the shoulder seam's allowance toward the sleeve. She creates a roll at the top of the sleeve head, a small, soft ridge that supports the shape. The dress now has arms. It stands on the form, complete in its silhouette. The long sleeves hang down, the buttoned wrists grazing the hips of the skirt. The bodice is fitted. The skirt is massive. But it cannot close. The front of the bodice is open. It needs the lacing. She pulls the stool closer to the dress form. She cannot take the dress to the table now. It is too heavy, too complete. She must work on it as it stands. She measures the front opening. She marks the position of the eyelets. There will be 20 eyelets, 10 on the left, 10 on the right. They must be perfectly aligned or the lacing will look crooked. She uses the chalk. ... She picks up the awl. It is a tool with a handle of polished bone and a spike of tapered steel. She does not use a punch to cut a hole. Cutting would weaken the fabric. She uses the awl to pierce and separate the threads of the velvet and the linen. She places the point of the awl on the first chalk mark at the top left. She pushes. Pop! The steel slides through the fabric. She twists the handle. Twist, twist. The tool forces the fibers apart, creating a round hole without breaking a single thread. She leaves the awl in the hole for a moment to set the shape. Then she withdraws it. A small, neat hole remains. She threads her needle with a heavy silk twist, the color of the velvet. She begins the buttonhole stitch around the raw edge of the hole. Loop, not pull, loop, not pull. She creates a ring of knots around the hole. This reinforces it, turning the raw puncture into a sturdy, finished eyelet. The silk thread shines, creating a tiny, raised ring. She works her way down the left side. Pierce, twist, sew, pierce, twist, sew. It is slow work. The light in the room grows stronger, turning from gray to a cool, pale white. The dust motes begin to dance in the shafts of light entering the upper panes. She finishes the 10 eyelets on the left. She switches to the right. Pierce, twist, sew. The repetition is the final meditation. The dress is nearly done. The anxiety of construction has faded, replaced by the calm of completion. There are no more risks, no more cutting, only the final, slow stitches. She finishes the last eyelet at the waist. She ties off the thread on the inside, burying the knot in the lining. She puts the needle down. She puts the awl down. She puts the thimble down. She walks to the cedar chest. She opens a small drawer within it. She takes out the lace. It is a cord she braided days ago. It is made of the same cream silk thread, 8 strands braided together into a strong, square cord. It is tipped with aglets, small cones of silver that prevent the ends from fraying. She returns to the dress. She inserts the silver tip of the lace into the top left eyelet. She crosses it to the top right. Criss-cross, in, out. She laces the bodice. The action pulls the 2 front panels together. The velvet kisses in the center. The gap closes. The bodice becomes a solid shell of cream, holding its shape, rigid and proud. She ties the lace at the waist in a simple bow. The silver aglets dangle against the velvet skirt, chiming softly. Ching ching. The dress is structurally finished. But it is not ready. It bears the scars of its making. It is covered in lint. It has chalk marks. The pile of the velvet is crushed in places from her grip. It looks tired. She fetches the brush. It is a curved brush with soft bristles made of boar hair. It is clean and dry. She begins the grooming. This is the act of erasing the maker. She must remove all trace of her hands, leaving only the perfection of the garment. She starts at the shoulder. She brushes with long, sweeping strokes. A swish and swish. She brushes against the nap first, lifting the dust and the lint. Then she brushes with the nap, smoothing the fibers down. The velvet responds. The crushed spots spring back. The chalk marks vanish into the air as white dust. The fabric gleams. She brushes the sleeves. Swish, swish. The buttons shine. She brushes the bodice. The lacing sits flat. She brushes the waist, navigating the deep valleys of the cartridge pleats. She flicks the dust out of the crevices. She moves to the skirt. This is a vast landscape to groom. She kneels on the floor. She brushes the front panel. She moves around to the side. A swish and swish. The sound is rhythmic, like the sound of waves on a shore or the wind in dry grass. It is a cleaning sound, a purifying sound. She brushes the train. She brushes the hem. She inspects every inch. A small piece of white thread clings to the velvet. She picks it off, a speck of wax. She scratches it away with her fingernail and brushes the spot. She stands up. She walks around the dress. She wets a clean white cloth in the water bowl. She wrings it out until it is barely damp. She wraps it around her hand. She hovers her hand over the velvet, not touching it, but letting the moisture of the cloth revive the pile. She breathes on the velvet in the stubborn spots. Her warm breath releases the fibers. The dress glows. It stands in the center of the solar, bathed in the cool white light of the winter morning. It is a monolith of cream velvet. The bodice is tight and structured, a cage of elegance. The skirt is a bell of soft, heavy luxury. The train pools on the oak floor like spilled cream. The sleeves hang ready to embrace. It is no longer a collection of fabric and thread. It is a wedding dress. It has a soul. It waits for the bride. The seamstress steps back. She retreats to the shadows near the hearth. The fire is dead, but she does not feel the cold anymore. She feels the warmth of the work. She hears a sound. Far below, deep in the bowels of the keep, a heavy door slams. Thud. Then the faint sound of footsteps on stone stairs. The castle is waking up. The servants are stirring. The wood is being brought for the fires. The water is being drawn. The night is over. The seamstress looks at her hands. They are red and tired, the skin dry, the fingertips calloused. She wipes them on her apron. She unties the apron strings. She pulls the apron off, folding it neatly and placing it on the table. She picks up her tools, the shears, the chalk, the needles, the thimble. She places them one by one into the wooden workbox. Clink, clack, thud. She closes the lid, click. She picks up the scraps from the floor, the last bits of thread, the dust. She throws them into the cold ashes of the hearth. She looks at the window one last time. The sun has crested the mountains. A single shaft of pale, winter sunlight pierces the glass, cutting through the gloom of the room. It strikes the dress. The velvet ignites. The cream turns to gold. The nap shimmers with 1,000 tiny highlights. The dress seems to breathe in the light, holding it, amplifying it. It stands there, radiant and silent, a promise of warmth in the heart of winter. The seamstress smiles. It is a small, tired smile. She pulls the sheepskin wrap tight. She walks to the door of the solar. She places her hand on the iron latch. The metal is cold. She looks back. The room is still. The work is done. The silence is safe. She opens the door, and the sounds of the waking castle rush in. The smell of baking bread, the sound of a distant voice, the life of the day beginning. She steps out, closing the door softly behind her. Click. The dress stands alone in the quiet room, perfect, waiting and eternal. The end.